Hello everyone! Right then. So I'm going to apologise now quickly in advance. Some of you will know that since the double pneumonia, I have got a slight dust allergy going on, which only seems to show up when I'm dealing with really, really fine dust. And I have tablets and etc. things that are sort of helping me manage it and stop me having a massive reaction to it. However, that's the little pink tablet you sometimes see me take. However, today they have been doing a whole lot of, how do I put this politely, concrete busting. And other stuff which has made a lot of very fine concrete powder. And tomorrow they're going to be doing even more fine concrete powder, and the same probably on Saturday. This means that when I was considering whether to do a live night, because I thought I might start sneezing halfway through, or maybe even cough a bit, would it be better for me to delay the live? And then I realised I'd have to delay the live till pretty much next week, and I didn't want to do that. So I apologise to everyone. It's been a bit of a fun week, coughing and sneezing. A lot of writing's got done, but I rather can't finger sneezing. I apologise. So, hello everyone. Hope you're well. I'm just going to make sure that YouTube is behaving itself before we get into this too much. And this was an interesting topic for me to get, because this is what were the top 5 suggestions topics that cited you to garner enough votes to be addressed from Patreon. And that, well, that meant there was a lot to go through. There are a lot of options. I'll be explaining a little bit more about that in a second, but there are a lot of options. So, I have fixed YouTube. I'll fix it. And let's do that. I'll make sure it's gone live. Oh, good Lord, buffer. Oh, buffer my buffer. Oh, buffly buff. Why are you buffering my buff? You buffly buff. You buffering up the buff. Aye, bufferama. Okay. Can I just say something? The authenticator app things on phones, they're not really helping the argument of making your phone any less valuable, are they? You know, making everything even more valuable. You know, that everything's on your phone. Now, publish. Done. So, hello everyone. How are we all doing tonight? Now, when this was first set, I'm fairly sure, as topics go, the person who set it, there's now gold coins, didn't think they were going to be causing me that much trouble. And honestly, I can understand why they wouldn't think it would be. Well, here's the answer. Because when you go back to it now, we are over 70 posts in the collection patron votes. I.e., there have been a little over 70, since this channel's begun, patron votes, where topics have been put forward. The average is about 18 topics per selection, but that's because for a while we had an average of about 8 to 10, you know, roughly for about a year or so, and then we went up to 21, and now we've basically maxed them out every time since. So realistically, there are a lot of topics, and of that, all those topics, every month, as a rule, well, we have for at least the last 2 years, 2 winners get a live and a patron live and premiere, and 2 more get a premiere. Before that, it was just 2 would win. So we're now at a sort of situation, and I mean this in the nicest possible way, where there are quite literally thousands of options which haven't won. I got a white hair appeared in my beard. Ooh, I got a white hair. I'm getting distinct. I'm turning into a silver fox. Anyway, so when you say select 5 that you liked which didn't get made, A, thank the Lord for Jack Ray's website, because I did check them. And, well, because some topics come up again. And also, I have to admit, I was a bit naughty. I must admit, I simplified my job. I counted the months. And I worked out that there have only been 5 Novembers that we've had these votes. For 5 Novembers. Because there was a November in 2023 where I was going to be, I'm not sure what it was, but for some reason I didn't do any votes on November 2023. Couldn't find them anywhere in the patron vote. So I have no idea what happened in November 2023. I did think, hang on, was I away that November? And then I thought, no, I haven't been away any November. I go away occasionally in October. I'm going away in October hopefully this year. I sometimes go away in June and July. But I don't go away in November, so I have no idea why there were none for November 2023. I cannot think about it. No idea. But I went through those Novembers, and I picked 5 topics. Just 5. Okay? That's what I was asked to do, so that's what I did. Picked 5. And it's at the moment, the December patron suggestions are currently running right now. The patron vote will begin on Sunday for December. So that will begin on Sunday the 30th. So you've got a few more days to add in topics you want to suggest. And I think it's £3 a month for patrons, which is about the lowest I can set it to for patrons to join, and I think that's about £4.50 on Apple. I have no idea why Apple insists on making being a patron more expensive than Android, but it does, and I just don't understand. I don't get that extra money, please note. I'm absolutely certain that extra money doesn't come anywhere near me. But Apple be Apple. Be Apple. So, This was, I have to admit, all of them I picked are ones which are rather strange to me for why they didn't win. I honestly couldn't tell you why they didn't. Letters of Battle of Guadalcanal, 12th to 15th of November, 1942, for a courtesy of Daniel Freeman. That was one which I'm kind of surprised it didn't win. There was like 8 options that month, I think. November 2021, George Emmons, The Construction and Career of HMS Africa, All the Africas. Well, honestly, was I going to turn down a chance to talk about HMS Africa? The moment that came out, there was no chance I was not going to talk about HMS Africa, given half a chance. November 2022, Andronaut's Spy Ships of the Cold War. Andronaut tried this about 12 times. It never once got more than 10 votes. Now, some months, 10 votes is enough to get you into at least 4th place. I will admit that. But some months, and sadly these months for Andronaut, it was definitely not 10 votes. See, the thing is, again, the voting system is everyone gets multiple choice and everyone can tick every single one they like. So you could tick all of them if you would like all of them. But you also could only tick one if you wanted to. It's entirely up to you. And those months that Andronaut put in the Spy Ships of the Cold War, the average ticks were about 25 for the winners. So 10 doesn't get them anywhere near winning. November 2024, David Pearce, an engineering overview of metacentric height. How it's calculated and sometimes miscalculated. That is going to be a fun one. That is included in this one. It is literally one slide. I have to admit, when it was put forward as an entire video, I was even at that time thinking, how the frig am I going to make this 3 hours long? I can give both the history students approach and the engineering students approach. I've taught both. I once had a student who sat in the engineering one and then went and sat in the history one. And they came back to me and said, You taught that differently and didn't include all this, and this bit. And I went, yeah, but that's because these are historians. They need to have a rule of thumb guide to metacentric height. You are engineers. You need to have the mathematical equations to be able to do it, because if your calculations are wrong, people are affected and die. If their calculations are wrong, people call them an idiot in the comment section. And also, you mostly are quite good at maths and already have a mathematical calculator. They do not. There is a difference in the audiences. There is a difference in the way it's taught. Normally, I would not be teaching metacentric height. I teach, I used to teach in engineering courses, engineering ethics and disasters. That's what I called the course, ethics and disasters. Eventually I added on ethics, disasters and academic skills. We added in that bit as well, just to make sure they understood exactly the reason they were there. So they would learn the ethics of engineering, the disaster of engineering, which reinforced the reason of why the ethics existed, and the academic skills so they could actually write a proper essay. But again, the thing is, it's very different than when I'm teaching historians and those things. Now, then we have November 2025 visions. US Navy's Ticonderoga class cruisers are actually built to cruiser standards. Would this benefit the USN? Now, this is an interesting one to get into. I did have someone interestingly recently comment on this thing, going, you know, there's no, you can't hold ships to the same standards of cruiser in the 1970s when they're armed with missiles as cruisers in the 1930s and 40s. They're not dripping with armor. I didn't have the heart to go back to that particular person and point out that the ships that they call dripping with armor were carrying some of them less than 900 tons, some of them less than 600 tons of armor, despite being technically called heavy cruisers, let alone when we're talking about the light cruisers, which are of the same size and scale of the vessels they're talking about. I'm sorry to say this, but being a cruiser does not mean you come dripping with armor. it doesn't mean that happens. What we're more talking about is your size and scale of your hull, the level of subdivision you have, and the level of redundancy you have built into your system, and how much your systems are built to independently deploy. That is where the weight comes from. So that's an interesting one, and as said, the questions are open for the bot. I think I've gone with a Tyco built on a light cruiser hull, so I've gone with a Long Beach one. It makes sense. It does make sense. So, anyone that's still out there staring at a blue screen, hit refresh, lol. Okay, Marvin. If anyone is staring at a blue screen, please do hit refresh if you're hearing my voice. And I should tell the people on Twitch that I'm getting poked about a Pokemon drop. Apparently there are things going on for Pokemon balls on Twitch. I have no idea why. One of my ship-shaped colleagues, I won't tell you who, but you can all guess, is poking me about Twitch things. I have no idea why. This is the point at which I should admit that the only times I've ever watched Pokemon has been with my little cousins, and I've mainly been there going, oh. 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 Yes. In the nicest way. Long Beach is the last actual ship built by the US Navy to cruiser standards. Every ship after that has been built to destroyer or maybe destroyer leader standards at best. Destroyer leader standards, Virginias, etc. The Tycos were built on a modified Spruance class hull, which is definitely a destroyer. Yeah. How old is it? Okay, Mark, from there you completely lost me. So, that being said, Guadalcanal. So, Guadalcanal is one of those operations where it gets really scary once you start looking at the numbers. People like to talk about the sheer volume of casualties lost at Guadalcanal. Here's the scary thing. 14,000 out of 20,000 Japanese soldiers lost in the Guadalcanal campaign were lost to starvation and malnutrition, and basically they just died through bad diet. Think about that again. 70% of casualties, 70%, the vast majority of the division, were lost due to bad logistics. This is the point that's often forgotten about Japan in World War II. They expanded harder and faster than their logistics could support. This is why I find it funny when people go, oh no, the British couldn't have won Malaya, and I go, well actually they technically could. If they had held on to Singapore if they had not lost control of the reservoir in Singapore, and held on to it for a few more days, the Japanese army was about to run out, not have run out of food long enough. They're probably going to all start dropping like flies from starvation. There's only so long you can run without food. The supply runs into Guadalcanal are impressive in how many efforts they put in. It's dashing. There's all sorts of destroyer operations, cruiser operations. But again, they're not things you should be doing. They're a good way to lose ships. Leslie, 2 to 5 days. Yeah, there is a debate about how much of the Japanese army, but basically when you do the simulation and you have the British control of the reservoir around Singapore by actually putting troops in the positions they had dug to defend the reservoir and hold it, they can usually hold it, and within about a week, most of the Japanese army that invaded Malaya is dead. Not through British fighting. So, by the way, it's not really a glorious British victory in that scenario. It's more a, hooray! Famine wins again! That's why I find it funny when people go, oh, you're writing a scenario where the British are going to win, you know, you're being so pro-British, and I'm sort of going, no, the real winner in this battle is famine. It's famine and pestilence, realistically. Trust me, it's not going to be good for the British to deal with it. Not going to be good for anyone to deal with afterwards. It is the reality of it. And by the way, that is like most sieges. The vast majority of sieges, when the besieged party wins, it's because the besieger has mucked up their food supplies. Now, Guadalcanal is probably the best example of this. But there's also Burma and countless other operations where, frankly, the reason why the Japanese actually are trying to build railway lines, are trying to do all the things they're trying to do, is because their supply organization is terrible. Even before American submarines get involved, their supply situation is atrocious. We joke about Rommel being logistics happens to other people, but by golly gumdrop, the Japanese take it even further. And before anyone say the British are great, no. Afghanistan. Just look at the operations into Afghanistan, let alone some of the operations up the Nile. We have also royally in the past mucked our logistics up. Even the Americans have fallen for this. Logistics is one of those things which sneaks up on you, especially when you've got forces which have had a long period of peace. Or have had relatively successful minor operations and then a long period of peace. Where they've always had the trump power. Where they've always had the ability to go, yeah, our logistics will get through. Logistics and supply lines will make you come a cropper. The power today, which I sometimes really like to talk about, is the fact that the French army has their own, and the French structure have their own logistics organization. And it's one of those interesting things when you start to look at France, and other powers have sort of copied this in some ways, but in France, the logistics department is almost a separate section in the armed forces. It almost completely ignores everyone else. You need to have a decent logistics line. And in the case of Guadalcanal, these operations, one of the things you have to think about is with the Japanese launching these operations and going with these plans is that their historical strategy prior to World War II had all been set up upon attrition, upon the enemy advancing towards Japan and them attriting them down as they get closer and then fighting a decisive battle. So the idea had been they were going to be collapsing towards their logistic and industrial hub. Think about it. You set up your entire force structure for 30 years based on that idea. Based on the idea, and thanks Dave Harris, by the way, for the super chat. based on the idea you're going to be withdrawing towards your home. And suddenly you're trying to fight a crust campaign, where you're going out and you're building up bases around an edge to hold your opponent at a perimeter. Think about that. This is what we're dealing with. So if you want to fight an expeditionary war, if you want to fight these kind of operations, that's fine. But build the logistics for it. If you look at the current armed forces of NATO, and again, we've talked about this, a lot of current militaries, etc., which have hollowed themselves out on the idea of, oh, our allies will supply this, so we don't need to spend that, and all this, you know, all those various things. The reality is, you cannot depend on allies for providing it, because they're not guaranteed they're going to have enough for themselves, let alone send extra to you. And if you want to fight the kind of warfare where you're able to maneuver, where you're able to do, you know, joint dominance or a JDOM or any of the different methodologies of warfare, modern warfare, which we're talking about, they are incredibly logistically heavy. Even in the recent war between America and Iran, there is a very high chance, judging from all the information circulating out, that the Americans have had trouble with their logistics. We know they've had trouble with the logistics of supporting and sustaining their aircraft carriers. Why? It's not because they don't have the systems and things in place to support them, they always did. It's just those things were set up on the premise that they were always going to have easy access to nearby bases. Basically, the modern American logistics system is dissimilar to the British logistics system of the 1930s and 40s, where we're going to send our supplies to nearby bases and then not have to commute it that far from those bases to wherever the fleet is. Remember that thing that the Royal Navy gets critiqued in a lot, because people go, oh, you don't have the same number of fast fleet oilers and long-range logistics ships the Americans have. And the British go, well, no, because we have bases, so we move the supplies between the bases and then we have a few faster ones to take them from the bases to the warships. Well, that's how America's designed their modern system, because it's a cost-effective methodology. If you are going to be the world's policeman, that is the way to do it. The trouble is, if you suddenly find yourself cut off from those bases, because you don't have enough bases, and suddenly you're having to support yourself from bases which are a lot further back from the theatre you're operating in, or the specific portion of the theatre you're operating in, you find yourself with issues. So the lesson of Guadalcanal is logistics. 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 And so, yeah, logistics is a lesson. But this then filters into command structure. I did love it. When I put these pictures together and I set this up, I just went, to the lovely auto thing on the PowerPoint. It's auto design button. And I thought, maybe it'll come with this time. Maybe I won't have to manually do this. And it did. And admittedly, that's not exactly perfectly where I would like it. I'd like it a little bit more probably this way. But it does. Now the command structure. Okay. Here is a small problem. When your primary military organizations, your Navy and your Army, are so busy fighting a, let's be honest, very real war against each other, let alone political war, very real war against each other, you have problems. You have massive problems. And this is half the issue again for Japan, because you're pursuing a strategy which the Navy isn't set up to support and the Army isn't set up to sustain. How this became their strategy, I do not know. I have read through Kaigan, I've got it here, I've read through lots of other books like it, including some I got in Japan and brought home with me. And there are honestly enough jumps of logic, enough leaps of faith in the strategy that it is disjointed up the wazoo. As said, we are talking about a nation whose naval doctrine was attrition warfare. Attrition warfare. Okay? Not taking and hold distant territories, attriting the enemy as they advanced into your terrain, setting up temporary small forward operating bases to support seaplanes and other things that would provide reconnaissance assets and extra strike assets as you collapsed back towards Japan, attriting your enemy and whittling them down to a size at which you could confront them in a decisive battle. The attrition is a critical part of it. The big ship, big gun policy is their deterrence policy. The attrition policy is their warfighting policy. It makes sense to fit together, and yet they don't do it! They do a cross strategy. Okay. So a cross strategy requires you to reinforce all those areas. You need torpedo boats, you need submarines, you need lots of things you can put forward and base as defensive positions, destroyers up the wazoo for every single one of those island bases. You need aircraft for every single one of those island bases. You need construction machinery for every single one of those island bases so you can build the frigating island bases. You need troops for them all. You need everything. And here's the absolute rub of this. The Imperial Japanese Army strategy is not much different. Their strategy is not to charge forward, take territory, and then collapse in or hold the brittle formation. Their strategy is to push forward, keep concentrated, and do mass attacks. There is no space for you to do a mass battle on any of these islands. Nothing that fits the Japanese doctrine, as terrible as it is. Let's be honest, they get beaten by the Russians, they get beaten by pretty much everyone but the Chinese. And the only reason they don't get beaten by the Chinese is because they're taking in a mass amount of machine guns, artillery and logistics, which the Chinese don't have access to. That's it. And then you've got the whole debating, the fighting between the various factions within the army and navy. Okay, there are factions within those command structures. There is the entire fact that there's a large chunk of the army which doesn't want to get involved in the war against the Americans at all. There is also the faction which Tojo comes from, which wants to use the army to try and take as much territory from the colonial powers as possible, so that they will be as strong and able to dominate the region. That's the problem. You have two factions in the army. You literally when I say two factions, you have about 24 factions, but you broadly speaking have two umbrella factions. Let's consider them like a modern American politics, okay? You have the Republican Party, which has its factions in it, and you have the Democrat Party, which has its factions in it. And sometimes those factions in those parties actually find more common ground with a faction from the other party than you do with their fellow factions. Now, there are a lot of problems in this whole scenario. There are a lot. And one of the things you find is that the tactics of the Chinese IJA, Chinese army, IJA, Manchuria, Chinese, the basically the army of Japan in China and Korea. Their tactics are slightly different from the armies which are deployed to Malaya, to Indonesia, to Naval, to the East Indies, to all the places they go. Momoka, do questions have to be topic specific tonight? I am prepared to allow latitude within a certain degree. Basically, modern politics, no thank you. But everything else, yeah, fine. Broadly speaking, historical and naval. Okay. Leslie, League of Blood. Yeah, here's the fun thing. Okay, the fact is you've got League of Blood, the Imperial Way, the Thursday Dinner Club, and the Cherry Blossom. And let's be honest, any of us would not. I know us not like to join the Thursday Dinner Club. It sounds so nice. Thursday Dinner Club. I know what they are like in reality, but can we all agree Thursday Dinner Club sounds like a rather nice group to join to. It sounds like some group which goes, you know what, we're all going to get together on a Thursday and have a nice dinner because frankly it's nice to be with friends, and we know Friday's the last day of the week, we know it's going to be horrible at work, but that's fine because we're going to have a nice dinner and then we'll go into Friday work and we'll get through that and then we've got the weekend, right? There you go. Eric is saying no. Yeah. Thursday Dinner Club sounds so nice. I am surprised these lovely people have you haven't all formed a Thursday Dinner Club for this channel. Get together, have pizza, watch me make a tomato myself. But yeah, it's an absolute nightmare in command and control. It is a nightmare in command and control in running this organization, and that's a problem. Not just for Japan, for everyone else involved. Because one of the reasons why you have so much trouble with the Allies with working out how are we going to defeat Japan, are they defeated, is because of the different factions. You have intelligence coming in from one faction. They support peace. Oh, thank God. But another faction, they want to fight to the bitter end. So there you go. Who are we dealing with? And you don't know which faction is actually in the lead at any one point, realistically, when you're looking from the outside. Because the trouble is, especially with Japan, is the factions can be so subtle. Calvin He, are you going to delve into failures of Japanese intelligence during the campaign? No, because how do I put this? The whole point of tonight is we're covering 5 topics, so none of them are getting the. They're not getting. They didn't win the vote, so they didn't get They lost the vote, so they don't. Instead of them getting each like 12 slides, the 5 topics are splitting 12 slides between them. So I picked the 2 biggest ones, which were logistics and command and control. Basically, intelligence would have been about the next one. But there's also failures in the Allied side intelligence at Guadalcanal. Guadalcanal is one of those operations where even the Allied command and control side likes to muck up as well. It is fun like that. Thank you for the hydrate, Minecraft Watcher. So, basically, before you find yourself in a war, get your command and control sorted out. Work out who's actually in charge of what they're doing. Okay? And actually get them to work together. There is part of me which sometimes does wonder whether Japan would have done well if one faction actually had managed to win control properly and had ended up being undisputed in charge, because at least they'd have all worked together. But that would probably have led to a massive civil war in Japan and probably made sure the war didn't happen because of that. Then we get to the Africas. Well, the first Africa that you can go back and find is an Essex class. Yes, an HMS Africa, the 1761 one, comes from Essex. Now, here is one of the interesting things we're going to talk about this one, because this is a free parser. It does make it a bit surprising, is this particular Africa has quite a short service life. It really does. When I say short service life, she's launched in 1761. She's sold out of service in 1774. She does 13 years of service. It becomes even more strange when you realise that she's a Thomas Slade design. 64 gun, third rate ship of the line. Did her first commissioning under Captain Alexander Hood, serving in the Mediterranean Fleet under Admiral Edward Hawke. You know, you couldn't have anything more prestigious than that. She was out there until the Treaty of Paris brought everything to a close. And so she's then paid off when she gets home after that. And that's in, sort of May 1763. And then she's recommissioned. She's sent out to the Caribbean. She remembers that the raid was out there till November 1765, helping with the Caribbean squadrons. And then she returns to Portsmouth, and she's paid off for a second time. Now the thing is this a particularly bad ship? No, it's a good ship. It is a Thomas Slade ship. If you don't know Thomas Slade, he is one of the greatest ship designers the British had in the age of sail. He's also famous for designing things like HMS Victory. Slade is probably one of the best shipwrights the Royal Navy has in this time period. But, strange enough, her and her sister, Essex, neither of them last really long in service, and she is declared surplus to requirements in 1774. Now here's what makes it interesting. She's declared surplus to requirements in 1774. She is a ship of the line. Normally you would expect them to last 30 to 40 years in service at the very least. Could go on to 50, 60 years. So she is sold and gone. Then you have in 1781, laid down in 1778, so 4 years after the previous one is got rid of, less than 4 years, you have this HMS Africa laid down. HMS Africa is based on an adaptation by John Williams of Thomas Slade's design for the 74-gun HMS Albion. She's an inflexible class vessel. Literally, it's one of the later good ship designers of Britain. Not quite Slade, but still pretty darn good is Williams. Copying a design which was produced by Slade for a larger 74-gun third rate, and shrinking it down to a 64-gun ship. And they're doing this within 4 years of selling off the previous one. I just want to tell you all, if anyone tells you that it's modern politics which is the trouble, modern politicians are short-sighted, and older politicians used to have far better range and vision and would sit there and go, yeah, no, we need to preserve this stuff for the future. We might need this capability in a few years' time. Just think about that. In 4 years, it goes from surplus to requirements to we're building another one. Literally 4 years. The previous ship, as I've just said, was 13 years old when she was got rid of. This ship, and it gives you a good example of how long they could serve, she is ordered in 1778, laid down in 1778, can launch in 1781, and isn't broken up till May 1814. That's after going through the Battle of Colaborative and the Battle of Trafalgar. This is the Africa which sails down the Franco-Spanish line going, "Hello everybody! I am here!" The ship which handled itself with so much confidence, the French believed, honestly Villeneuve and everyone believed, there was a third line, a third column of British ships coming towards them. Think about that. Literally, under Henry Digby, she sails down to the battle of the Franco-Spanish fleet solo at the Battle of Trafalgar. Just the 64-gun ship going along going, "Hello, I see you! The largest four-deck first-rate ship in the world. I am coming for you through your entire Allied fleet solo!" She's actually also one of the ships that once chased USS Constitution for 60 hours. So there is a very real history where a USS Constitution ends up in a one-on-one fight with HMS Africa. In which case I put my money on Africa, mainly because in the nicest way, to have been able to solo the entire Franco-Spanish fleet and survive at Trafalgar. That ship has plot armor up the wazoo. I'm sorry, it just does. This ship has plot armor. You and I might have regular armor. We might have survivability stats. We do not have the level of plot armor that is soloed the entire Franco-Spanish battle fleet at Trafalgar. I still maintain that Constitution would have quite happily taken on the rest of the ships in the Royal Navy Squadron in there at that time, but they knew she was in there, and they just went, there is no chance that we have that much plot armor we can survive against that. But think about that. She served for 33 years. Her predecessor, built by one of the greatest naval shipwrights that Britain has ever seen, was allowed to serve for 13. She's an homage to his work. Santa Canera Constitution has plot armor, like chainmail. HMS Africa has plot armor, like a full-on Dune force field. There is a level. This is on par with Warspite. I still maintain Africa is the most forgotten ship of the Battle of Trafalgar, and I wager one-man war to try and include her in things whenever we talk about the Battle of Trafalgar, because we remember Warspite doing donuts in front of the High Seas Fleet. This ship literally hoes in the view of the entire Franco-Spanish force. She engages, actually, the San Diego and Trinidad. Literally. She ends up... She's firing salvos. This 64-gun ship is exchanging salvos with the 130-gun San Diego Trinidad. Happily! And she survives the battle. She fights the Intrepid, a French ship of the line, so 80, I think she's an 80-gun ship, for solo for 40 minutes. She goes through the entire Battle of Trafalgar and she suffers 62 casualties, loses her mast, but is still fighting at the end. And HMS Conqueror has to tow her to safety after the battle's over and has to keep telling her to stop engaging the Spanish and French who've been captured. She's going, are they trying to free themselves? We will fight! There are some claims that Digby misinterpreted Nelson's signal to join up on the columns. But it seems to be not so much that Digby misinterpreted the signal, but as he said to his quarterdeck, if I try to join up on the columns, we will never get into a fight. So, boys, we have a choice. We sail that way and tack onto the back of the column, and we will never be there, or we sail that way with confidence. They literally did the, if you go anywhere with enough confidence, people won't ask you questions thing. It is the really sad thing is, and I do mean say this is a sad thing, is that you probably never get another ship called HMS Africa built today. It's a name which would just be, I could imagine the naming committee would be having panic attacks over it because of all the various people on all sides of politics over it. And yet, it's a name which has such history. They've got, so many battle honours, so many glorious things they've done in terms of their history. It's just, they deserve it. They deserve their status of it. And then, then we have this. The King Edward VII class. She commissioned on the 6th of November 1906. HMS Dreadnought commissioned on the 2nd of December 1906. Think of that. When she is laid down in 1904, she is a King Edward VII class, one of the most powerful, if not the most capable, battleship design in the world at a time. She is an unparalleled weapon of war. She is capability beyond excellence. And yet, what is going to happen to her? There's the Swifter class coming along behind her. They also are soon finished and soon in service. I think most of them actually in service before she is, because of the way the King of the Service were broken up in terms of their building. And then you've got Lord Nelson's coming as well, which take this idea onto an even greater level of capability. But you also have HMS Dreadnought. And that's the really disturbing thing when you start to think about this. From the point of view of a command and logistics and infrastructure and building point of view. This ship is being built at a time which it is being surpassed not just once, the Lord Nelson class, but twice, the Dreadnought class, HMS Dreadnought herself. The Royal Navy is literally building about 8 or so battleships in various stages at the time. And it is completely making them irrelevant with its latest build. Why do I mean that? Well, you can argue that the older ones, it doesn't really matter much. They're already heading for second-line duties. But you're literally building, at the same time as you're building Dreadnought, you're building these. Now, you can argue, well, hang on, they are doing the ultimate conservative thing in terms of defensive current. They know this idea works. They are building, as Michael Gucci just put quite accurately, the insurance policy for the insurance policy. And it's difficult to argue that. It is difficult to argue that. But, and I mean this in the nicest way, the Lord Nelson class are laid down in May 1905. Launched September 1906 and commissioned December and June 1908. The King Edward VII class, the British build 8 of them. They lay down the first 4 in 1902. They lay down Britannia and Africa and Hibernia in 1904. And they lay down New Zealand in 1903. The question becomes, can you ever have too much money as a naval service? I think it is hard to argue that the Royal Navy in this period doesn't have quite so much money that it is in many ways racing to spend it. And whilst, yes, it is covering the world's largest empire, there is part of me who sits down and goes, should Africa, should Britannia, should Hibernia, possibly Lord Nelson and Agamemnon, all actually be dreadnoughts? And then you think about it going, well, hang on, what happens if the British did do that? If the British, instead of building dreadnought, build 6 dreadnoughts? For launch, laying down 3 in 1904 and 3 in 1905. What happens? That's the really interesting question, because the British going thought they were saving money by ordering a single dreadnought, but if they'd ordered 6, they probably would have saved money. Because if you build the 6 ships, you have most of a battle squadron, but also, suddenly you have a capability which is really scary, because people, to match you, need to build 6. But that's the problem. The Royal Navy had been building a consistent strength of laying down pretty much 4 battleships a year. 4 a year. The argument then should be is that, well, if you're going to lay down 4 a year, you should lay down 4 in 1905. You should, right? Well, you get the 2 Lord Nelsons, and you get HMS Dreadnought. 07. You wouldn't break the bank by any stretch of imagination with the Royal Navy construction. You'd have kept up with constant construction they've been doing for years. But think about how quickly the Royal Navy would have had 12 dreadnoughts in service. Or rather 10 or 14 dreadnoughts in service. You see, they have the insurance. They have the guarantee of national security, which you cannot argue with is a good, important and critical thing. It's the thing you're focusing on most. But you also have this going on. This going on. And the thing is, then you also have Fisher's reforms, which structure the fleet more and more around a land fleet idea of concentration of force. And realistically, these are distributed warfare capital ships. It's the really interesting thing, but let me explain this. Okay. So, these ships, with their layers of different weaponry, are far more capable of sustained independent operation than a dreadnought in their earlier stages. Dreadnoughts are big artillery tools. Yes, they have 3-inch guns on. Other sort of secondaries like that. But they are based around their primary weapon, and they are based around fighting other dreadnoughts. And the thing is, that reflects the fact of naval warfare at that time period, that they were concentrating. And the reason they were concentrating was because the weaponry was getting a lot more powerful, but the sensors and ability to process data was not accelerating along development at the same pace. So you brought the ships together to concentrate their power so you could actually utilize it at the maximum range. Because the further you're firing, the less likelihood you're hitting, so the more shells you need to be firing at that range to increase your chance of hitting. But these are built for a period when fighting was likely to get nasty, dirty, and close. I.e., pretty much the way the Battle of Tsushima ended. But that takes us to the shameless book plug, which is also the point at which I'm going to answer questions. But I'm also going to make a little bit of announcement. So, I am doing some initial discussions, some very good initial discussions, working out something which should be coming soon for the channel. The idea is going to be to probably do a challenge coin for the channel. Now, let me explain why this matters, okay? So the idea is, we do a challenge coin because I'm trying to talk a company into doing a Blackburn plushie. Okay? But, understandably, before they're going to go down the route of doing a plushie, they want to check there's actually going to be people interested in these things. If my channel actually, people will be interested enough. So a challenge coin is a sensible and conventional place to start for a naval history channel. It makes sense. Italian Military Archives have done it, Drax done it, they've done it. So the idea is we do a challenge coin, and it hasn't been, when it's all confirmed, I'll make the proper announcement and do it properly, but I wanted to put this out there, this was coming, so it's something I'm working towards. Challenge coin, and as part of the challenge coin thing, you'll be able to tick a box, hopefully, if everything goes to as I'm hoping it's going to be, and say if you'd be interested in a Blackburn plushie. And then I will deliver, hopefully enough people are interested in it, we'll do a second thing where it'll be the Blackburn plushie. And if that goes well, I have plans up to and including a travel class destroyer plushie and various other things like that. So watch the space. There are going to be announcements properly. But thank you, Paul, for copying Ludo Port's question. But this is the way I'm going down the route of, because yeah, the thing is, the really interesting thing is, I think the plushie will actually work out cheaper to buy than the challenge coin, but the challenge coin is far lower investment on the company side, I think. But that sort of thing is, I want there to be both. I'm also trying very hard to take the fluffy torpedo with me to a TV filming soon. So, if I do manage to succeed in taking my fluffy torpedo with me for some filming, you will see the fluffy torpedo in a TV show. I'm not sure if whether I'll be allowed to show the brand or not, so I might have to do this with it so that people can't tell what the brand is. But yeah, taking with me some TV filming. That being said, questions times. So let's do this. Let's open up Discord. Well, I hope a lot of people want them, because it'd be quite nice to do it. But it's a case of it's one of those things of, I am very much following the advice of the people involved. They've done a lot of this stuff before. As I said, they've worked with Drac, they've worked with others. They are people who are trusted and who are good at this. And I want to do the best quality I can deliver for you all. And I've come up with an idea for the challenge coin, which means it's going to be a very different from normal challenge coin. Very different from normal. It's going to be hopefully be something special, and I think it will. I think it will be special. I think it's one of those things of, I put a lot more thought into it than I necessarily thought I was going to put into it. When it was first put forward to me, I was going, I don't know how to do this. Is it going to be something which I can do with the channel? Is it something I can work with? And it's one of those things, when I started down the road to being a historian, all these things, they didn't have a class on merchandising. They should have done. I wish there had been a class in the PhD of working out of dealing with merchandising, of how to do it, run it, and how to sort it, so that you would know when you're going in and talking to these companies what questions to ask and how to be of help to them. Because ultimately, at the point, you both want to produce something which is a very good product. You both want to produce something which is going to be a lot of fun for all of you to enjoy. But realistically, I had no frame of reference at all. No frame of reference at all for what to do. And I must have been so annoying to work with. I really must have been. And I do apologize to them for that. Or hold the brand side towards me, like, I could do the brand side towards me. I could do that sense. That sort of method. I'll see what I can do. I will take a fluffy torpedo with me. Now, you only see 4 topics. There are 5, Wayne. I'm not sure why you're missing 4. Nope. I am not going to sing Toto. I do not have the upper lyrics for it. Actually, hang on. I can do one better than that. I can do one better than that. I can torment you all. I mean, I can show you all. Not torment you. I would never be that cruel. Right then. There you go, for your delectation. That was a few years ago. In the chat, Stafford Thompson, the American fleet aren't ambushed in night action Guadalcanal and sink the Japanese fleet. How does that affect the duration of the campaign? It shortens it quite considerably, but that's because it makes the logistics situation even worse for Japan. It's basically logistics. Wayne, ignore last question. Need remedial reading classes. It happens. Joe Fredericks. Let's say Chiang managed to accelerate the planned Guangzhou offensive 5 months earlier and is incredibly successful. If this offensive takes Hong Kong, would the city be returned to Britain? Okay, so Chiang Kai-shek, whilst he would probably want to keep Hong Kong, I think he still returns it to Britain because he'd rather have Britain as an ally than as an enemy. He needs the supplies. He needs the support of the allies. So I think it's going to depend on how useful when it comes to these things. Even though he does have the worst habit of picking people as intelligence officers who are absolutely not loyal to him. I do not know why, but he is terrible at picking people who are intelligence officers. Chiang Kai-shek really should never be anywhere involved in picking intelligence officers. Scummoner Apprentice, with the recent use of the success of the 5-inch deck gun in Hormuz, do future classes move back to 2 mounts rather than the single mount found on the Isle of Bucks? Potentially. There's also, and I've heard this, as you might know, I do quite a few videos about the Ottoman 76, and I have never been funded by them ever at all. Thank you, Lion Judd. It's a case of never, so I'm not funded and never, but because I've done so many videos on them, I now get quite a lot of their people talking to me and sending me stuff on Twitter and various other things. I get people from Ottoman going, "Oh, hi, Dr. Clarke, here's some more stuff, latest fact sheet and these stuff," and I go, "Thank you very much, that's very nice," and I enjoy it. And some of the things I've been hearing recently is that there are a lot of American accents currently turning up looking at the Ottoman 76's latest versions. So there could be some Americans currently, some in the US Navy currently going, well, maybe the sensible thing is maybe we carry a pair of 5 inches, maybe we have a 5-inch and a couple of 3-inch guns. You know, maybe we go down this route because we'd love to have a laser. We really would. Just the bloom is proving absolutely chronic to deal with at the moment. For those who don't know, thermal bloom, when we're talking about lasers, has to do with the dissipation of the energy in the atmosphere. And it's proving fun. Look, Stafford, if I woke up one day and found an Ottoman 76mm sitting in my front garden, my neighbours would have a fit. The people currently trying to build a housing estate that way would probably have a panic attack. And I would probably get a call from the local constabulary asking me exactly what my latest lawn ornament was. In good news, I do have gnomes who are armed with AK-47s. I kid you not. I found them on Amazon. There are gnomes you can buy which have AK-47s. I have a whole platoon of them sitting in the front garden. They are disturbingly cheap to procure. that you can get ones on special order with rocket launchers and various things. They are worth it. If you are not one who has a family who likes to put gnomes in every single garden, and so you want to slightly suborn the gnomish thing by having gnomes which are cool gnomes, I have ones with bazookas, I have ones with AK-47s, and I have ones with swords and various various other weapon systems. You know, they're all good. It would be my emotional support 76mm. Okay. So we'll see what happens. I think they're going to probably have more 5-inch guns, but I wouldn't be surprised if you also see 76mm turning up there. And I also had this conversation with... It's amazing how much the data from HMS is starting to counteract some of the data from Ukraine, theoretically. Okay. I will help you all out with the Garden Gnome army to extent. There you go. The RN has been looking at a 30mm closing weapon system. There are quite a few people who are annoyed when we got rid of the goalkeeper, and they're now looking at various things. There's also been looks at can you make a 40mm closing weapon system. I would say there's also a thing about the 35mm Millennium gun system. If we consider the Italians consider their 35mm and 76mm to be complementary weapon systems, that they like to have both because they feel they complement each other and support each other. It's one of those random things where you sit there and go, okay. Shouldn't warn you, those gnomes come in a pack of 3. They're all in that pack, but you're gonna want more than one pack. Just saying. You know, these things happen. So, Navy should invest in cruiser-style ships nowadays. Navy should be investing. I would say we're already building, to an extent, we're already building ships which are expected to do the cruising role. We just don't call them cruisers, and we don't really necessarily build them with the facilities they need to do it. And usually it's a case of, yes, it's going to be a slightly bigger ship, and it's going to be full of things like, how do I put this politely, workshops to keep stuff going. But if you want to actually have operations going, and if you want to have things like drone ships at sea and all these things, you're going to need to increase the capabilities of your average warship to actually sustain those ships. And they are going to need things like 3D printer workshops, etc. in them. And you can't just have a 3D printer set up in the side of an engineering space. It needs to have its own room. It needs to have its own power supply. It needs to be quite clean. So I think you're going to see actually a lot of spaces which have sort of disappeared on ships return on ships. I'd be surprised if you end up with a woodworking space returning, but I wouldn't be surprised if you get a lot of 3D printing spaces, etc., and things like that. And I wouldn't be also surprised if those facilities then start to become more and more common amongst other places, like mechanical shops, etc. Because you're going to end up with a skill set which is growing out from there. Ramol, would you call the Guadalcanal campaign as the true turning point of the war in the Pacific, since Japan technically lost the war of attrition in a long campaign? Losing experience meant. Yeah, it is definitely one of the points you can point to as a turning point. I'm not really that keen on the phrase turning points in war, because that suggests that, how do I put this politely, that the war was going one way entirely at the time. I think it's turning points are more about our perception of the history than the reality of the history. Because if you consider, even in points where the Germans are being victorious, they are losing things and they're having trouble, and that's all building up towards what is eventually their actual loss. You can point to things where they are victorious, and you can go, "Yeah, they won that battle, but look what it cost them." For example, you can point to the Battle of Denmark Straits and go, "Yeah, the Germans win that. There's no argument there. They won that battle." But that ends up costing them Bismarck, which is 25% of their capital ships. And it's part of the newer 50% of those capital ships as well, which are the 15-inch arm, the bigger, more useful ones. Yeah, the British lose Hood, but they had King George V, Prince of Wales, Duke of York, Queen Elizabeth, Valiant, Malaya, Warspite. I think they still have Barham at that point. I don't think she's been lost by then. Maybe not. Raw Sovereign, Ramillies, Renown, Repulse. For the British, losing one is annoying. It's not something they want to do, but it's one ship lost out of 15 or so. Nelson, Rodney, all the things they have. For the Germans losing one, that's a major loss. It's not exactly an equal trading. So yeah, they won a battle, but they then lost their major asset. And that operation is not a turning point in either way, shape or form in the Atlantic. The turning point in the Atlantic, you could argue, is actually the introduction of the larger corvettes of the Castle class, when they start coming in numbers, but we'll leave that to one side. So yeah, me and turning points do not have a good relationship. Ramol, related question 1. Even though Japan lost 4 carriers and a cruiser midway, they still could conduct large naval land and air offensive operations after Midway, so the momentum wasn't lost yet since Mid. Yes and no. Basically, Midway isn't so much a battle which decides whether or not Japan can conduct operations. It's a battle over who is going to be able to control the maneuver across the sea more freely. Who's going to be able to use their secondary fleet, basically, freely. Japan is still able to use its primary fleet, yeah. But you look at how much effort the Americans put into using escort fleets and all those sort of things, flotillas, etc., and compare that with what the Japanese can put out. The Americans can use their escort carriers and all those things in the way they do because of the sea control they win at Midway. Would you also call Guadalcanal the ultimate learning field for the US Navy in terms of logistics? It is certainly an area where a lot of their pre-war ideas get crushed, and a lot of their pre-war ideas which did actually work got promoted, so it's useful. Foxhound! I've just seen it now. I wonder what the question didn't come through, and I looked around. You did Q and A exclamation mark. I think that's cute. but it is also, I'm going to laugh about it. Well, Foxhound, you do realise it's only Tuesday. You're saying it's been a long week, but it's only Tuesday. Go with me, chat. It's only Tuesday, isn't it? Okay. What if the Japanese had pushed on and sank all American transport ships? They were vulnerable after the Battle of Savoyon. Could they have won the Guadalcanal campaign? They could have sunk all those ships, and the Americans would have had to fought to bring more supplies in. But I don't think the Japanese would have won the Guadalcanal campaign, because even if they do annihilate the Americans can replace those forces and send in more supplies. The problem for the Japanese is they can't send in more supplies. It's just a nightmare for them. Ramol, do you think the overcomplicated battle plan of the IJ and IJN during the Eastern Solomon battles example made miscommunication number issues happen on the field? Yeah. Let's put it this way. So, if I have two commanders that don't get on well and don't want to talk to each other, and I have a complicated plan which requires them to talk a lot in order to deliver it, I have built a plan which is going to work against myself. I've built a plan which is going to work against me and work against myself. So there is absolutely no point in it. It is very, very silly for me to do that. Knowing how terrible the infrastructure was in central China, and seeing how some areas lacked even dirt roads, why did AJ still attempt attacking into Chongqing with such conditions in place? Because they thought they could pull it off. Again, there are commanders in history, Joel Fredericks, for whom logistics is something that happens to other people. They are sadly more common in history than we perhaps like to think. But they do happen. And they are the lessons of history. Look, I've been recently, because of sorting out things for potentially what else to do if we can't do it for, if we don't have the dates confirmed for the conference in time, so we can't do the Falklands before this in October. We have to do the Falklands next year, and sorting that out, with that coming out. I have been putting together another trip. I've been looking at doing both a UK trip as a potential option for October, and I've looked at another trip which could be Spain and Portugal. And the UK trip has the advantage of I get to wander around the UK and meet a lot of people. The Spain and Portugal trip has the advantage of being about half the price. That's including a ferry each way from Plymouth to Santander. I have no idea why, but it's about half the price for the same amount of time. And for renting a car and everything else for that same period. And basically I was putting together what would be a quick trip, something which would be over a couple of weeks, so that those of us who were free could do something, could come around and talk to you all, but also do our normal thing of promoting museums which need to be visited. Yes, if we do go to Portugal, I would have to message and negotiate with Rita for what would be the package for her being our how do I put this politely? Tour guide. I'm not sure how we will negotiate that with her, but we'll do our best. Pay her in cats. I don't mind giving her. I don't mind promising her Gareth and Dan's cats. Yeah, it's amazing. Like UK in October, the hotels seem to be disturbingly expensive. Wandering around the UK, the same hotels, same level of hotel which we normally stay in. You know, we're not talking 5-star accommodations. We're not that, and none of us are that particularly fancy. We usually aim for a solid 3-star accommodation, because it's something which is good enough that you can usually leave your laptop and stuff in the hotel room and things, and it's got security and those stuff. So no, and yeah, the hotel prices in Spain and Portugal in October are. Whew, the hotel prices in Britain for some reason are. Hee! I have no idea why. It's cheaper. But why am I talking about this is because putting together the logistics of all that, and that sort of scenario, you start to think you're dealing with the realities of it as a piece of history. And when I'm starting to talk about what we'll be doing in Portugal and Spain, we'd of course be going to the battles of the Napoleonic Wars. We'd be doing something Iberian Peninsula campaign stuff. And Ciudad de Rigo and those places. Bajos. And the lines of Torres Vedras. And that's cool. That's something we're looking forward to, if we do that. But you sit there and go, that is most of the Napoleonic Wars in the Iberian Peninsula is a commander who's very good at logistics taking on commanders who aren't. And he's mostly exploiting naval logistics. This is what the French forces never seem to understand about Wellington in his attack moves. He is constantly gripping up to the coast. Why? Because the Royal Navy will supply him with the with the supplies he needs. The Royal Navy will make sure he has the supplies. So he has a secure supply line. They are facing guerrillas, they're facing all sorts of problems. When they try and launch raids against him, they find last mile logistics, which is usually heavily secured. They never find a huge supply convoys to go for. Why? Because the supply convoys are floating up the water. They are secured by Royal Navy warships. And, you know, Joel Ferris, when you start asking the question, again, you're asking a question of, knowing how terrible the infrastructure was in central China, why are they doing it? Because they think they can get away with it. They think they can just march the infantry. There is a lot of emphasis placed on, well, you know, the troops will make it. They've got honour. They'll march in. Yeah, they will, but you can't supply them with food or ammunition. Calvin Gasberg, could Iranian strikes have destroyed US prepositioned supplies during recent conflict? Not really. Most of them are in hardened facilities. It's not so much the supplies are destroyed, it's where they are. How do I put this politely? Okay, so we've talked about in the past on this channel how some of the least mobile things in the world are heavy bomber squadrons because of all the facilities you build for them. So imagine what a supply depot for a fleet is like, okay? Imagine the warehouses full. Imagine the sheer quantity of stuff you've got. You basically take it to that port by ship from your home country. You deposit in warehouses there, and you remove it by ship. Think about what the ports are talking about, the Americans that exist for the Americans in that area. And think about, you know, the fact that Is there a major rail network to move those goods in and out in that period, in that place, in those places? Not really, to other ports. So the supplies, once they're in those Navy bases, are stuck in them. That's the problem. And please note also, it's... How do I put this politely again? There's something about the American fleet going, oh, well, they haven't gone into the Straits of Hormuz to fight the Iranians up close. You don't! That's the whole point of naval warfare. If I can stand off 1,000 miles from you and take you shoot the life out of you, that's winning. I don't go, oh, you can only hit out to 200 miles. I must engage you from 150 miles away, so it's fair. Ramol, do you believe that the US won the first land battle against the Japanese during the Battle of Tuilagi and Gavatu instead of, or before, the Aussies did at Milne Bay? I think that's one of those situations where it's a game I'm not going to get involved in playing. And let me explain it. They are hard, all those are hard-fought battles. And I do not understand the idea of a mythology where we start turning them against each other. And start playing one off against the other. It seems to me... no point in it. It's just... okay, there's... when you've got the people from the individual units joking around with each other, that is one thing. Once you have historians getting in on it and basically calling different sides liars or calling it a mythology, and you sit there and go, it's just not a battle I need to engage with. It's not one I want to do. So I don't. Millennium Sword. If any or multiple Kriegsmarine vessels defected the Allies for any reason, which one would be the most beneficial for the Allies, and would they allow said vessels to operate or not? Tech-wise, it's going to be one of their submarines, because any of the submarines they capture, any submarines, if getting information about the submarines is always helpful. But yeah, the most beneficial would be Allies if the, I don't know, for some reason the German destroyers and the German cruisers and destroyers decided during the Norway campaign to defect to Great Britain. And just all ended up in Britain, including the land forces going, we surrender aboard them. And so instead of invading Norway, they take themselves off and intern themselves in Britain. And would they be allowed to operate? Yeah, once they'd had the troops taken off, they'd be allowed to operate. Probably be sent to operate somewhere far away from Germany so they couldn't defect back to Germany without trouble. Send them to Mediterranean, send them to the Indian Ocean, send them to places like that, far away from German areas of German control. Do you think that if King didn't move the Guadalcanal area to the US Navy's South Pacific Command and MacArthur's in charge of the area, the campaign would be lost because of MacArthur? I doubt it. I think it would probably take longer as there'd be a lot of posing for photographs, but I think it would be still fine. Nice to hear. With HMS Africa's 1781 second and third future lives, why was her name moved from the Drake-class cruiser to King Edward VII class battleship? Prestige. The names flicked around and they decided Africa was prestigious enough it should go on a battleship. There's also colonial things at the moment. We're talking about a period of tribal class destroyers and all sorts of things going on in that period. Its name's not retired, Wayne, it's just never going to be selected. Again, prestige. She deserved to be a decent-sized carrier. Points. What happened to the first Africa after the sword? Is there any history of her? Basically, she's broken up for wood. She just sold us wood. There are some desks going around. You can find a desk apparently made of her wood. I know because I did a bit of tracking. It came up for auction about 10 years ago. It's not of the Africa of Trafalgar fame, it's of the previous Africa. Limbov, would the French Navy have fared better with if they went for privateers and smaller but more powerful ships to the line instead of trying to build a fleet to match the RN? Not really. Their main problem was that, as I've talked about before, the fleet that's at Trafalgar's main purpose is to try and release the fleet that's at Brest, because only by combining with that they can take on the Western Squadron and hopefully get into the Channel. The problem for the French is that they have to sustain an army as well as a navy. If they go for a privateer war, which they did try at various points, so this is not something the French didn't try. The French did try a privateer war at several points in history. They A, lose control of the privateers, they have no ability to direct them, they will go where the money is. And B, this is the most important thing, the British tend to be quite good at blockading in the privateers as well. And so the British just blockade you whether you're launching a fleet or privateers. It doesn't really bother the Royal Navy. And whereas your fleet might be able to break the blockade, your privateers try and run through the blockade, they can't get back for it with their prizes. Okay, Lions, what is this? You sent a corgi? Okay, this I have to go see. How do you send a corgi? Good lord, you have sent a corgi for 1,000 jewels. What is this new thing? What is this thing in YouTube? I have no idea. Oh, I can start a goal. I have no idea what I'm gonna do. Let's do. Okay. So, please note, I am enjoying the corgi quite a lot. That is a very cool corgi, Lions. An incredibly cool corgi. The corgi is outside. The corgi is always outside. I'm gonna send that. I've got to send that through to my mum at some point. Yeah. There are some things in here. No. Oof. Yeah. This is cool. Okay. I'm gonna have to figure this out at some point, because YouTube has done some things and modernized somehow. Again. Imperial, why wasn't HMS Africa preserved? Or over the course of history, why didn't we really preserve that many of our warships? Because the presumption always is you're building new warships. You don't preserve the old warships, you've got the new warships. You know, you have heard me talk before about how there's a third-rate ship of the line which is literally still afloat and still fine after World War II. And they scrapped it! I have no idea why they thought that'd be a bright idea, but they did. I have no idea how you're sending through treats and gold coins now. yeah, they're not just nuts. Basically, when it comes to preserving history, the British ruling class are very good at preserving their houses, very bad at preserving their history. It wasn't. No, there was another one which was bombed by the Luftwaffe, but there was another one which was basically survived and was fine. Would the French Navy have fared better if they went for a grey navy with privateers and small? Answer that one. Sam Thompson. What class would have been given to South Africa as the capital ship if the treaties allowed it? Whatever class was that was allowed to the other dominions. Remember, they're an equal signatory to Canada, Australia, India, New Zealand. So if they're all being given a capital ship, or they're going to get the equivalent level. So if they're all allowed a battle cruiser, they'll all get a battle cruiser. And at that point, they probably would have it if they were supposed to have it. Let's put it this way, Phil Warner. There are periods in history when some third rates do get into trouble with Danish gunboats, etc., because they're fighting in fjords and the gunboats surround them and are attacking them from all sides, and basically it's a bad place to be. Saying that, though, I think sometimes the sources on the Danish side kind of overstate the likelihood of their being actually successfully threatened. The British memory of it is, it got a bit hot, but we were fine. The Danish memory of it is, we would have successfully taken them. I think I do have a white hair coming. A beard. Yeah, see? Oh, sorry. Distracted. But it's one of those interesting things. No, doctorates do not include things like merchandising. Believe it or not, though, we did spend a lot of time on the subject of if your student walks into a room and locks the door behind them, what do you do? And my point to that was, why am I in a room with only one door? Which apparently, according to the person who was instructed the course, was not a good response. But again, I don't like being in rooms with only one door. Unless I completely control access, I do not like being in spaces that only have one exit and entrance. I just never have. So I honestly couldn't understand a scenario where someone could walk in and lock me in the room with them. Because I really wouldn't want that to happen, so I wouldn't be in a space with it. But yeah, that was a long discussion on that one. And you did have to deal with it occasionally whilst you're a PhD student. I wasn't actually at King's. I was helping out teaching at another university. I was doing my PhD, and there was a time where I was wandering. I'd finished teaching. I was wandering back to the kind of shared office space, which was where I dumped my stuff. And it was a really weird space. I wasn't quite that keen on it, because literally it had one door, and then it theoretically had a second entrance, but that second entrance was often blocked by stuff, because it was used as a storage dump by people. And so I walked in the door, and I found quite a big student confronting a very small PhD student who was teaching Navals, and I basically went, "Hello, I'm here for my stuff, but I think I'm going to sit down and sit here for a while because I think I need to." And they decided to. Let's put it this way: the student decided they were going to leave, and yeah. And I made sure that PhD student got to the train station before I walked to my car. I basically went, "So where are you going? Where are you off home tonight?" "Oh, I'm getting the train." "That's good. I'm walking into the train station." "But you drive." "I know." I walk you to the train station and I walk back to my car. But it was a case of, yeah, didn't spend much more time at university, because I went after that and had an interesting conversation with the technical head of the department and said, you should not have a scenario where that back door is locked, or that back door is blocked, and then people can't get out it. And apparently that was me overstepping my place as a contract lecturer. And I went, it's a safety hazard. If I hadn't walked in then, you could have been having a very different conversation with people you really don't want to have this conversation with. And I then reported the matter to security, and they agreed with me and also pointed out it was a fire hazard, keep blocking the door. So yes, I think things got changed. So anyway, what do you think about Zheng Hei's Chinese animal farming ships where they grew tofu? There is lots of interesting discussions for how he supplied food on the voyages. I'm not sure if he actually had farming ships. It's gonna sound strange. It's a possibility, but I think it's more likely he had supply ships which stopped off in ports which they already had relationships with to exchange gold for supplies. I'm considering doing a BA in War Studies or War Studies in History at King's. Can you ask for your opinion on the University Studies and environmental there? It's lovely. It's a lovely department. It's a lovely space. I love every time I get back there to give a guest lecture. I have great fun every time I do. It's a really friendly, really good department. And there are some really cool members of staff there. It is what I would consider an incredibly geeky department. They once said the phrase to me, and it's very true, we don't need to advertise. People who want to do it will find us. And they are oversubscribed for every place, and there is a reason they are. They are very good. But that's often the same with most of the best university departments. They don't really go out hunting people. People find them who want to be there. Twitch should not be down. Twitch should be working. No, Twitch is working, according to me. It's just failed to determine content classification. I've put just chatting. I have no idea why, but apparently Twitch has failed to determine content classification. Oh well, life happens. Right. Next question. Why is that deciding to go big screen, sorry? Why did it suddenly decide to go big screen? No idea why. Right. Do you think we'll see reemergence of ships like the Flowers and Bathurst escorts again, given how we've seen how vulnerable ships are shipping out to drones? Have we seen how vulnerable ships are to drones, though? That's the question. Look, I think we are going to see a emergence of small, cheap escorts. I really do. And I think they're technically probably going to be uncrewed. I've talked about this before. In terms of flyer class and those things, I think they'll probably be uncrewed assets. And they will fulfill the role of smaller escorts. I do not necessarily agree with the popular phrasing that's coming in that all these ships are vulnerable to drones. And let me explain why. I don't think ships are inherently vulnerable to drones. I think ships, if you build them underarmed, without the proper layered defense and layered weapon systems, can be threatened heavily by drones. But I think if you've got a properly built ship, the threat of drones is a lot less. For example, if I was in a Italian version of the Horizon frigate program, okay? Or even some of the Italian Frems, with the layer of 3-inch guns, the 5-inch guns, the surface-to-air missiles, all the systems I have, the 35mm guns I have, I would not be worried about a drone threat. I would be going, right then, oh, there are the cheap drones coming in. Well, worst comes to serve, I can stick up a barrage of 5-inch shells, 3-inch shells, and 35mm rounds to deal with them. I'm really not going to be that bothered by the small drones. People might go, well, hang on, what damage can they cause you? Well, it's only if they can reach me, so it's going to be the ones which can reach me fast, wherever, and find me and reach me. That's a first problem. Second problem is, it's what can actually attack me. Anything which is big enough to justify a missile engaging, i.e. is a big enough, fast enough threat coming in that it's worthwhile me engaging a missile, I'm going to hit the missiles. And if I run out of missiles, etc., then I pull back. I don't carry on into places which I'm going to be lose. I come back with friends, and that's the other thing. Usually ships are going to be operating at sea as a group of ships. So they should have not just their own layered defences, but a layered defences of other ships around them. Now, the problem comes when we're talking about people that keep talking about these ultra cheap, relatively short range drones. And that's what people sometimes don't understand. When we're talking at sea, we're talking ranges of hundreds, if not thousands of miles. So when you go, yeah, I've got this small drone, I can produce thousands of them. And you go, great. What can it do? It can do 50 kilometers an hour, and it can fly at that speed for 5 hours. Oh, good. So its maximum range is 250 kilometers. What's it like going into wind? Why does that matter? Well, because the winds over the seas tend to be quite strong. You have about 25 minutes, don't worry. There are entire 4 slides before we get to the psychos. Stafford, don't worry. I guess the was meaning a cheap air short for merchant ships. But the point is, again, if we're going to go for merchant ships and issues, one of the things I've been talking about recently is they're now talking about having actual stockpiles of guns and systems to put on merchant ships. We're going to have to go back to the rise of the armed merchant ship in some regards, of it actually having 30mm cannon and other things stuck on them, with radar and power generation. They can help it. Sure, 50 km, it can be around. Yeah, that's the other thing. Some people don't realise how fast the ships go. It's the joy of the history. It is. I think Twitch has started working in. I think it's gone happy again. Robula, what would have been the best, worst, or most interesting for us time for Argentina to make an attempt on the Falklands? I think if they'd attempted to, they'd actually attacked in 1960s. around about time they're making the CVA-1 decision, you would have seen them have to reverse the CVA-1 decision. If the Argentinians hadn't attacked during the CVA-1 decision process, the government would have had to back down on the CVA-1, because it would be a case of, oh, frigate, we actually need this form of carrier. Imperial, and that's before you consider electronic warfare and whatnot. Yeah, that's the other thing. Small, cheap drones tend to not be hardened against electronic warfare. Which is one thing on land, because on land, you tend to not have that massive electronic warfare capability carrying everywhere with you. Warships do tend to have a massive electronic warfare capability going with them. The worst time for the Argentinians to invade the Falklands would have been probably about 1985, if they'd waited a bit longer, and because there'd been even a lot less resources that around than there was in 1982. And yeah, most interesting is still, I'm going to go for about 1960s, when they're making the carrier CVA-1 decision. Oh, Megalon Ruse. Yeah, battle demonstrate. Hood doesn't explode. Do you think the ships batter each other to pieces? What do you think? I think if Hood doesn't explode, I think they do batter each other away for quite a while. I think also, potentially, you have a scenario where Bismarck ends up having to break off because of the firepower being waged against her. But I also think there is the more the battle goes on, the longer it goes on, and it is over relatively quickly, the more likely it is, A, that the cruisers get involved, the British counties, because they're not going to hold off forever, no matter what orders admirals are trying to say to them, and you're more likely to find things like King George V and the Victorious coming up and trying to get involved as well. I think probably if it goes on for long enough, the question is going to be how long, if the same faults hit Prince of Wales at the same time as they did historically, because I don't think anyone's stupid enough to believe that Hood should go. Hood, which is a battle cruiser, should go one-on-one with Bismarck. So if Prince of Wales ends up having to pull back because of her damage, yeah. But the odds are, if she doesn't blow up, and if they, let's put it this way, if they don't get a 1 in a million shot, it doesn't cause that much damage in the area where it would hit. So yeah, would be interesting. So anyway, how does the mass fleet bases of Djibouti work? Are naval bases Djibouti's main industry? I'm not going to answer that one online on the grounds it might incriminate me, or at least get me into trouble, people. Who I have been winding up about being based in Djibouti for a while now, but literally, yeah. Oh god, let's put it this way, there are some very interesting companies in Djibouti. Mr. Acker, hello. The former Indian Chief of Defence Staff claimed the Pakistanis mislocated their carrier group by 300 miles during recent conflicts. Thoughts? I wouldn't be surprised. It's quite hard to find a carrier battle group when they want to hide. And the being that far out would not surprise me. I would also add, and I really should add this in, carrier battle groups are one of those things which like to wander around and like to maneuver, and they can be spread over quite a wide area as well. So yeah, it would not be surprised me if the Pakistanis were reckoning. I would be surprised if they were completely 300 miles out, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were over 100. Split the difference and say roughly 200 miles out, and I wouldn't be surprised. Imperial. On to that one. You'll enjoy it. Andrew Lambert's cool. Is 1 or 2 HMS Africa more terrifying? 2 has the how do I put this politely? The plot armor. Again, in the nicest way. A Solo 64, the smallest third-rate battleship of the line you can get, soloing this entire Franco-Spanish fleet. There's all sorts of options for that. And that Karma goes, but it's going to depend on a lot of tailorable results. Look, one of the problems we have is that the other problem you got with the end of history, we are always going to be able to choose wars of choice doctrine, is you got people going for a one-size-fits-all solution to all problems. Because let's be honest, that is economically the most efficient model. The reality is not that, though. The reality is that you often need tailored responses. I was quite happy when I heard the first time I heard the phrase tailored air group for an aircraft carrier. I thought, great. Then what I found is that, as is usual with the British, it's basically another phrase for fitted for, not with. Tailored air group means we can have these aircraft aboard, but we don't. New IQE, given the need for ships to operate under communications blackout, our fleet library is still present on most warships. They have been on the ones I've been on. Luke Delaport, do you think we will see escort carrier make a comeback for convoy work? Perhaps half the size of the missiles, mainly armed with non-crewed assets and a few helicopters. Not sure about escort carriers, but I think you might see escort containers. I think you might see container systems for that basically provide, especially UAVs for ASW work, become a thing on merchant ships. And you basically spread out defences and things on all the merchant ships. Well, that being said, though, we'll do that, and we'll get back into the topics. So, Cold War spy ships. Now, here is the fun thing. I want you all to do a bit of a fun favour for me, right? I want you to Google British spy ships. Okay? I want you to literally type into Google British spy ships. And you'll find nothing. Really find nothing. The British have Q ships in World War One. No. There's no mention of the British having any spy ships which are doing electronic warfare. You go through the whole Cold War. Nothing mentioned there. In the 1920s, apparently it's only the Americans who fought to turn a merchant ship, the USS Gold Star, into an electronic warfare listening post. I want you all to think about that now. The world's largest naval power, which relied on Navy for everything, which fitted electronic warfare capabilities to every warship pretty much as a standard, which had the world's largest merchant marine, which wandered all over the place and into all sorts of interesting spaces, and yet officially, we never, ever once fitted something to do this kind of work. Does anyone believe that to be a fact? I cannot prove it because I cannot. I have gone looking as far as I can while based at home. I need to get into the archives. I've probably dragged through there, and find an actual document, an actual ship. But the thing is, I've come across enough little ships which were designed into this for things like Canada and Australia to think that, how is it the Royal Navy, which trained their navies, apparently never had the same idea? And then this is the same Navy which had Q ships and all sorts of other fun things. And have you seen what, certain British officers got up to in the world in the interwar period and how they'd wandered around? What do we think? What do we think? For some reason, the combined chat through OBS has decided not to show up again at the moment. No idea why, so I'm trying to keep track of both chats. I do apologise if I miss anything, but I hope not. There we go. I've got it working. Just sort of. Survey ships do spying? My dear knight, no, survey ships don't do spying, they do chart work. They just make sure we know exactly where we can use the bases, where we can use channels. Thomas, how many of those around the world did the Royal Australian Navy have, and how many did listening duty? So anyway, we'll leave that to one side, but this, by the way, USS Gold Star is a really interesting case. It basically has a crew of about 4 or 5 on it, depending on the time, of radio operators listening to what was going on in Japanese communications. It was wander up and down the coast in China, Japan, Southeast Asia in the 1930s, and was basically spending its whole time charting what the Japanese were getting up to. In the Cold War, your spy ships, though, came in roughly 2 flavours. This is something which, if you were part of a Royal Navy or American or French carrier battle group or Italian carrier battle group, you got used to seeing. The obligatory Soviet trawler. Honestly, fishing, Gov. Honestly. No poles out, no nets out, nothing out streaming at all. It is not there is no fishing gear on that ship whatso friggin' ever. But as its flying signals, it is fishing. And it just happens to be following your fleet. Yeah, before we get too far off the topic of it, I'd also like to point out that for many years the Royal Navy staff was basically naval intelligence. They provided the operations group, everything. The Royal Navy was basically, for about 20 years, the staff in the Admiralty were the Naval Intelligence Department. So yeah, we expect that the Navy, which is basically run by its own Naval Intelligence Department, doesn't have intelligence gathering ships. Really? Yeah. In this case, yes, this is what you would have following you. And it got to the point where some escorts swore they had these fishing trawlers assigned to them. Didn't matter which carrier they were with, what they were doing, it was always that fishing boat which was sharp. And no, this picture doesn't have the signal shapes up to show it's fishing. I have to admit, this one does not have the signal shapes to show it's fishing. They normally did, but this one doesn't. This one's just... Honestly, I tracked down a picture of what... I looked through the list of them, and... this was the picture which I felt best illustrated them as a group. It is apparently a fishing boat. There is no fishing going on that ship. They're not even attempting. There is no people working the deck. There are no pots anywhere. There are no lines. There is nothing on that vessel. My God, why would you need dedicated spy ships when every ship in the fleet acts on one? That is a point with every ship having electronic warfare capabilities and listening. That is the point. But there is also the point of sending something covertly into port to listen. But yes, the British did do a lot of what we would call open source intelligence gathering. Mainly, I thought that each naval attaché was the public face of naval intelligence. Yep, you can say that again. You'd be sailing around in the middle of the North Atlantic and suddenly you would get one of these come pottling up going, hello. Well, the trouble is, unless you have a legitimate reason to board that fishing ship, you can get into trouble by boarding it. And we all knew you could. So, Seneca, if you go alongside that fishing vessel to try and introduce yourself personally, you will find yourself dealing with the issues of, you are boarding a Soviet vessel! This is Soviet national soil! What do you mean by boarding this? Because, well, just remember, the Soviet state owns everything. So whereas if that's a commercial trawler for a Western nation, it's a commercial trawler, this is technically a trawler of the Soviet state. That becomes problems. That makes a whole lot of issues with diplomatic speaking. And then we have these. These are electronic intelligence ships. They are apparently built to watch satellites and other things which are doing, and ballistic missiles which are doing testings. They are scientific research ships. The fact that they are scientific research capabilities also mean they can act as command and control ships for task groups and have a tremendously massive electronic warfare listening capability is neither here nor there. Now, when you consider this particular vessel, this is the SSV-33 Ural. And I often bring her up because the Ural is special. She is built on a Kirov hull. They literally, instead of building her as a Kirov-class battlecruiser, and by the way, she is still nuclear-powered, they build her to do electronic intelligence, missile tracking, space tracking, and communications relay and command roles. She has two AK-176s, which are the 76mm guns of the Soviet Union, and 4 AK-630 30mm guns. Plus, she has Igla, which is the short-range missile system, Igla SAM system, mounts on her. Here's the fun thing. She was assigned to the Pacific Fleet, which at the time had no pier large enough for her. So, she has to anchor out, and her machinery has to stay running whilst she's at anchor to support all her other systems, turning her into, in effect, a floating barracks. Because she couldn't be supported and properly maintained, she hardly goes to sea. Excuse me. And as a result, a lot of equipment started to actually decay, and she had to be disposed of in, well, basically pulled from service in 1989. Despite the fact she only was commissioned, she is technically decommissioned in 2002. Okay. But she's only launched in 1983 and commissioned in 89. Now, she is technically laid up. Some argue from 1989 onwards because of this peculiar thing of her being with the Pacific Fleet and unable to dock and unable to probably... But realistically, she's laid up from about 1991, 1992 onwards. And she is a special ship. But you also find other large LNIT ships. There are there are French ones, there is American ones, etc. There are Swedish ones, okay? One of the more forgotten things is that the Swedish how do I put this politely? Like to have a capability. They do like to have a capability. And I think the current one is Artemis. Yeah, it's Artemis, I think. I'm always bad at remembering names. Yeah. They were talking about a vessel which is 2,200 tons. Carries 40 bunks, personnel. Built in Poland for Sweden. Basically, they built the hull and things in Poland, and then it's taken to Kockums, Saab's Kockums yard, Karlskrona, and finished. Lots of countries believe having ships, which are electronic warfare ships to gather information, is a very useful asset to have, because you can move them around and people never know which direction you're listening from. They're also around. Why pure? This is not a pure scientific ship. There is no scenario. This is not a pure scientific ship. Okay? No one believes it is. No one ever believe it is. Hence it's armed. It's, as said, it could also function as a command ship. Again, one of the things you have to remember about the Soviet Union and the Soviet Navy is communications is at a premium. Communications capabilities at a premium. And these were useful. This vessel was useful as a command ship. Over and above a Kirov. That's the thing. You might be now going through going, yeah, Sweden has this. Sweden has this? Okay. Sweden, you planning on conquering the world again? Maybe. The Swedish Empire will rise! We've been inspired by the fact that Wikipedia, like with the British Empire page, says you can help by adding to this list. We will rise again. I do love that Wikipedia still inspires people of the British Empire, that people can help by adding to the list of countries which have been conquered by Britain. It is a beautiful incitement to return to world domination. We must always remember Wikipedia is what's inciting this. You too can add to this list. Yeah, if the Soviet Union had built infrastructure to build or support all the things they kept creating, they'd have actually been dangerous. So now we get to metacentric height. Now, this is a fun one, okay? This matters because you can start to see with buoyancy. So, we have the centre of gravity. That is usually represented as G on design things. And that's basically the point at which the centre of the mass, it's otherwise known as centre of mass, that's the point at which the resultant torque, force, due to gravity, vanishes. It's the point about which the impact of water things would just pivot around. Okay? Then below that, you have the centre of buoyancy. This is the centre of mass of the volume of water displaced by the hull. Okay, so it's where basically, if you're looking at the water that's being displaced and you put it together, where the centre of the point of the mass will be of that water that's being taken out of the way. And then the metacentre. Now, the metacentre, when we are talking about in a scenario when they're in equilibrium and everything's lined up, really doesn't matter. When a ship's in equilibrium, it doesn't matter. But when you have straight lines from perpendicular to them, or going through from the centre of gravity or the centre of mass to the hull, and the centre of buoyancy and straight down, and those start to diverge, this point, this one where the lines intersect, that is your metacentric height. Now, why does this all matter? Well, think about it this way. When the ship is swaying backwards and forwards, that metacentric height in the water is what it's swaying by. When it's rolling in the water, it's rolling on the pivot point of the metacentric, not the centre of mass. It's not doing that. It's doing that. And so you have to watch that, because if it is too high or too low. If it's too low, you might say you have a very stable ship, but actually the top side of your ship is going to be moving more, isn't it? If it's too high, then your ship's also going to be rolling. So you have to get it right. And it depends on stability of the ship. It depends on the hull shaping, i.e. the movement through the water. It depends on where your centre of buoyancy is going to be in your hull shape. It depends on the weight in your ship, where your centre of mass is going to be. Again, you have too high a centre of gravity because your centre of mass goes up, your centre of gravity, centre of mass too high because you have too much weight at top weight. That's going to push higher, and that's going to push your metacentric height off. Alright? That is your metacentric height. So when we're talking about a metacentric height, we're talking around the pivot point at which the ship pivots when it's rolling. Like, if I was on this ship with this metacentric height in its hull, I'd be quite worried, because that is you are having quite a significant roll, and you are having quite a significant chance of water coming in. With that being said, though, and I'm hoping Stafford is back, because, yeah, I think he is. The thing is, you have to remember, the Swedish Empire, yes, included sections of Poland, also included large sections of Russia. That's the first thing you have to remember, Stafford. Swedish Empire included sections of Russia. Large sections of Russia. That being said, Ticonderoga class cruisers. Okay. So you always remember, these are designed as destroyer leaders, not cruisers. They belong to destroyer leaders, not cruisers. They are adapted Spruance class hull, which was a destroyer class. And they are reclassified as cruisers because there is a perception of a cruiser gap between the Soviet Navy and the US Navy, and so they do a reclassification. Now, the thing is, I know the point that you made is, well, you know, they're their own missiles. They've got a lot of missiles. They're a cruiser. And you sit there and go, yeah, the trouble is they're basically not much better than most destroyers at the time. And the point is, again, with these systems, is you're talking about something which was 9,800 tons fully loaded, 173 meters long, that's 567 foot overall length, 16.8 meters beam, 55 foot, and 10.2 meters, 34 foot draft. Originally armed with two 5-inch guns and 2 Mark 26 missile launchers or 261 cell Mark 41 VLS. It's not a bad fit. Let's be honest, it's not a bad fit at all. It's 122 VLS cells. That's not a bad scenario. And they were built to be leaders of the Desrons, destroyer squadrons, when they were the first been to go, which were escorting the carrier battle groups. They were built with Aegis and all the other systems in them, so that they would basically act as the quarterback for the destroyer squadrons, and were they able to be able to organise them. Kalmar-Gersberg, they had cranes in their VLS, so they lost 3 cells to support their crane systems for reloading capability. So they are 64 VLS cells in terms of 8 blocks of 8, but they actually only have 61 cells as free have been turned into a crane. Now the thing is, when I was asked to put this together and talk about the Ticonderogas as a cruiser, I thought, well, how am I going to do this in 3 slides? Because it's something which I can make a 12-slide thing of, I can work through. Or I can either do very quickly, or I can do very slowly. And I went, I'm going to do it quickly, because it is a 3-slide scenario, and I'll enjoy the questions. Don't worry, Carl, you've made a perfectly normal thought process. So, take a long beach hull, make it gas-powered. You don't have to make it nuclear-powered. You can make a long beach hull gas-powered. You could have gas turbines like you have for this particular vessel. Now, the thing is, the Spruance hull is kind of maxed out with the displacement it's given. It's maxed out. This is one of the reasons why the Burkes have actually got bigger than the Tycos. And their hull's now maxed out. But Long Beach's hull, well, she was 15,500 tons fully loaded and not maxed out. 15,500 tons fully loaded. She's 721 foot 3 inches long. That's 219.84 meters. Why does that matter? Well, that means she is, and I have to admit, I am doing this extended on my head, off top of my head. I think it's 48 foot, nearly 49 meters nearly, longer. Let's see, that's 173, so that's 27 meters off 200. That's 19.84. 27 plus 19 is 37 plus 9 equals 48.84. So yeah, roughly 49 meters. 49 meters shorter. The Tycos are compared to Long Beach. So, in simple terms, grow by just under a third in length. Okay. If you're using that hull, it's got a 21.79 meter beam. Now that's useful because that beam is about 5 meters greater. That's the Tycos is 16.8. This is 21.79. Let's be honest, that's roughly 5 meters. Okay, you've worn me down. It is 4.99 meters. I do apologize. And 9.32 meters, 30 foot 7 inch draft is actually shallower than the Tyco draft. Tyco draft is 10.2 meters. So, yeah. Now the thing is, when you go through her weapon systems, she's armed with 2 Mark 10 twin launchers, 1 Mark 12 twin launcher, 2 5-inch guns, 1 8-cell ASROC launcher, 8 harpoons are added later, and a Tomahawk which replaces the Talos launchers. You sit there and go, well, hang on, that's a lot more than the swivel arm Aegis carry. It is. So, if you convert her to an Aegis hull, well, she could carry 2 to 3 of those swivel arm systems for them. Or they could carry 2 sets of 93 cell, 96 cell, let's be honest, but with 3 missing for the crane, Mark 41 VLS for a total of 186 cells. Imagine that as your Aegis cruiser, as the backstop to your task groups in the late Cold War. Oh yeah, we carry 186 missiles. I know the point is that the Tyco carries 122. That's good. 122 is not bad, but this carries 186. It has 64 more cells. In simple terms, it has 50% more magazine depth. And also carries ASROC and Harpoon and 2 5-inch guns and a helicopter hangar, and has space for command facilities, and probably doesn't have a setup whereby the crew is actually spread across the beam into command center, so that as the ship rolls backwards and forwards, you're constantly rocking the people who are supposed to be manning the desks, watching for enemy aircraft. Just think about that. That's the ergonomic design in the Tycho. And the thing is, if they are gas-powered, they're going to carry enough fuel, enough space, they can possibly keep up the nuclear-powered carriers. The thing is, that's a capability. That is a real capability. And the ASA panels are what? 10 meters higher above the ones on Tigers and Boats? Potentially you could have them higher up. Potentially. You don't necessarily have to have the Long Beach superstructure, but there are options for having things higher up. And that, again, gives you a greater horizon, which gives you a greater defensive position. The advantages are useful. Interestingly enough, though, here is the real thing about this. If we take this and we add nuclear power, well, then you've reinvented the strike cruiser. If it's a nuclear-powered Tycho on a Long Beach hull, it is a strike cruiser. And the thing is, in a scenario where you have something like this wandering around, you have a very capable asset to turn up and go, excuse me. Let's put this another way, okay? So at the moment it's got 2 sets of 96 cells, which have been turned into 186. If you removed, on the newer ones, the reloading system, you would have 192 cells, which would mean you'd have twice the firing capacity of a Burke. That's the point. That becomes the real point. The sheer amount of firepower you can carry. Look up the USN Strike Cruiser program. They were on these nuclear-powered gorgeous ships. Actually, at one point, Long Beach was being converted into the proto strike cruiser, and then they decided to get rid of her. Now, the thing is, those are both good options. There is a gas-powered one, and there is a nuclear-powered one. And you know what would have been the really sensible option? Build both. Build some of them gas-powered and some nuclear-powered. You could do it like you've done with previous things, the Leahy classes, the Bainbridge class. Every single time you'd basically had one nuke ship as part of a batch of conventionally powered vessels. And you could have literally gone, right, and we're going to build two groups of cruisers which are exactly the same. We're going to build half of them gas-powered and half nuclear-powered. You're going to go, why? Because we need a certain number of nuclear-powered ships, possibly a third of the cruiser force. We'll probably aim for a half, which can keep up with the carriers, whatever the scenario. But we need the other ships to provide the numbers, and if they're not nuclear powered, they're going to be a lot cheaper to build. We can honestly build potentially 2 to 3 of the non-nuclear vessels I don't normally allow this language through, Calvin, but I'm going to on this occasion, because I understand the feeling. I might not use that language myself, because there are little cousins watching, but I'm going to presume that basically Calvin is referring to a left-handed nut and bolt scenario. Okay? I'll let it through, Stafford. You're being tougher than me tonight. Because the little cousin's watching, but I was let it through. The thing is, that's the strike cruiser. But the thing is, you have a scenario, if you're building them gas and nuclear powered, A, the commonalities between the two reduce the cost of both. And B, the fact is, if you do end up with, let's say, a 3-to-1 ratio rather than a 1-to-1 ratio between, or 2-to-1 ratio or something, between the nuclear powered ones and the gas powered ones, you probably end up with at least 11 nuclear powered vessels and the rest are these gas powered ones. And they're useful. At that point, they can start doing diplomacy for you. At that point, they can start spreading the message of the greatness of America in diplomatic terms. And they turn up, and it's going to be a case of, you got 2 5-inch 54s. Yep. You got 2 phalanx. Yep. You got 3 helicopters. Yep. You got 186 VLS cells. Yep. Yeah, but I can understand Calvin's point. As said, he was talking, everyone would know he was talking about left-handed nuts and bolts. They're very specialist. Little cousins are watching, Calvin. I think you have watched the channel before and chatted before, so I think you know what I'm talking about. But I've got lots of little cousins who, if they learn, like, I'm the only boy in 40 cousins. They're all girls, and they've got quite a lot of them have got kids, and so they watch my videos. And if it doesn't matter that some of their dads and some of their mums even work in places like oil rigs and things like that, if they pick up bad language, it's blamed on my videos. I should never have told the admins that is out there. I know you're all searching for it. I may or may not have now found it again, and it is still being kept active. The stats ladder of the admins. I don't think any of the admins have found it. Don't worry about eating the bar of soap, Cullen, but you know. The thing is, these would have been assets which would have been stretched. The thing you're talking about now with the American carrier fleet, one of the reasons why the American carrier fleet is so overstressed that it is literally the American diplomatic messaging goes... How do I put this politely? It goes, we're sending a book. We're sending another book. We're sending a carrier battle group. That's not helpful. There's no escalation going on there before you send in a carrier battle group. And the moment you send a carrier battle group, you might as well start knocking heads together because you've gone to all the expense of sending it out there. And it is expensive to send out there. That's why you had cruisers. That's why you had other ships to go. You know, if we go back to this vessel, okay? When HMS Africa was being built, it was not unusual for you to have a diplomatic scenario where it would go, a sloop's turned up and has been jetting away, and then a light cruiser, and then the station flagship, which is a larger cruiser, would turn up and say things. And then maybe an individual battleship would wander out and go, hello! So, you haven't listened to any of the locals. I'm showing you, quite honestly, our battle fleets can reach you. Do not make me bring my friends. Really don't want to make me bring my friends. Literally, there are wars which length is measured in minutes because that is how long it took for people to get a boat out to us to give us surrender after we started firing. When we turn up. So please do not make me bring my friends. Let's have a nice conversation about it. And we'll concede some things, and you'll concede some things, and everyone will be happy. Lions, I'm not forgetting the stage above the Carib Battle Group, the Amphibious Task Group. They often try and use the Amphibious Task Group interchangeably with the Carib Battle Group as a thing to show up, but let's be honest, when you turn up the Carib Battle Group, that means strikes are coming. When you turn up a Marine Battle Group, that means regime change is coming. Anglo-Zanzibar War, yes. Pretty much. The thing is, the whole point about naval diplomacy, and this is the really strange thing people don't understand about gunboat diplomacy, and the idea is gunboat diplomacy is this thing which is really, really nasty and dominating. It isn't. It is basically the equivalent of the police turning up in a couple of patrol cars and a whole lot of police getting out and looking at the local mafia or gangs and going, look, we see you. We know exactly what you're frigging up to. Go home and think again. Because this is not going to end well. Because realistically, you don't want to have a war with us. You're not going to win it. Well, this is why I am one of those people who's sitting there in about the Trump class, or as I like to call them, the Defiant class, because that's what they're supposedly named, and go, they actually do make sense to extent, especially as a diplomatic signaling tool, also to extent as a warfighting tool, and they are useful. But I think the trouble is it's become too much a political hot potato. I don't know if that's going to even survive. But I also do point out that basically all that's happened for the Defiant class to exist is the US Navy has kept updating the strike cruiser. They've given up trying to get a cruiser through Congress, and they've rebranded it as battleship. And they've gone, maybe this president will push for a battleship. And he will. That's literally it. Or just cops sit in for their own. Yeah. Again, it's a similar scenario. It's turning up with a battleship, hosting a party is the same as the cops going and sitting in a local cafe and having a drink and chatting with everyone. Making sure everyone knows exactly they're there and they're listening. You've seen it. It's sometimes shown in movies as such a caricature thing, but it's literally what sheriffs used to do in the West, etc. And I know because I had family in Texas in that time period, some of whom were sheriffs. And they would literally wander into the bar. And there was always one bar which they knew which was where the people who would cause trouble would hang out. And they would go in that bar, and they'd sit there, and they'd have a drink, and they would basically look big and mean and go, look, do you really want to deal with this? Or do you want to go elsewhere? And, if I remember correctly, the thing was, one of the sheriffs was really quite on the nose. He would take the Undertaker with him to have the drink. Because he was good friends with him. They'd been friends since school or something like that. And so, one brother went into running the family ranch. The other one went in to decide to become the sheriff, the local lawman. And their friend became the Undertaker. And when they knew there was heard there was something in the off, the brother who ran the ranch would bring in a couple of his more reliable wranglers with him, and would come meet the sheriff with a couple of his more reliable deputies and the Undertaker, and they'd go and have a nice drink in the pub which was frequented by them. And basically the point was made. There we have quite a few large people who are very happy to use their fists, use their guns, use whatever's needed to enforce law, and we have the person who will take care of you after we've dealt with. And he isn't a lawyer, he isn't a doctor. Let's be honest, the Defiant class itself is a rebranded strike cruiser. We all know it's a rebranded strike cruiser. Thank you, Jack Ray, for the memberships. We all know it. It's just a case of, yeah, we know this one. I do love some of the stuff that goes on. It's absolutely absurd sometimes, some of the things which happen. The trouble is, again, is the first in class. One of the things in Pure you have to remember is the first in class is going to include all the research and development costs and all the infrastructure costs to set up the industry and infrastructure to build it. That's the truth. It's going to include all those costs. And it's going to be expensive. You look at the costs of the Constellation class, you look at the costs of pretty much the Zumwalts. All of them included those costs, and this is one of the reasons why people keep comparing to the Burks, and that's kind of a bit of a silly question, because the Burks, the infrastructure and everything's already set up to build them. So they're about as cheap as they're going to get. So you keep comparing these designs, which are the new ones you want to build, to the Burks, and it's a mature, in-production design, which the trouble is, its design is starting to age out. That's the problem. The railguns might not get pared away, actually. The railguns are an interesting thing. Honestly, though, I do find it funny that the same president who is focused so much on railguns does not like emails. And I'm sitting there going, but they are basically the same thing. I know I shouldn't, I do apologize, but it's the one area where I find it confused. I sit there and go, that's confusing. Okay, notable Swiss contribution to naval history. Here's an interesting thing. Okay? So, Swiss contributions to naval history. The Swiss haven't really had a navy, but they have done various interesting things when it comes to the sea. The Swiss have been the basis for international law for a long time in banking and various other things. But what most people don't realise about Switzerland and their fighting is they've had a lot of lake battles. The Swiss like to have battles around and along lakes. One of the reasons is because they often have quite skilled boatmen, which they then use to maneuver and support their forces. So whilst they don't do necessarily battles at sea, or really traditional naval battles, they do a lot of what we would nowadays term as sort of almost literal style combat, in terms of shallow water engagements with lakes. Now, I'm trying to remember the battle which was the best example of this. I think it happened at Luserschilding, the Battle of Sempak. I think again, logistically the forces were helped out that one, but I'm trying to remember the exact battles off the top of my head, and that one's more difficult. Because the thing is, most of the battles talk about how they are good at pikemen and the various things which lead to, honestly, to the Swiss Guard protecting the Pope. And those things, the Landsknecht, and the Germans developing their Landsknecht and all these things. But the fact is, the Swiss also had the boatmen who would do their supplies. Oh, look. There is a story which I am sure is entirely fake, which is at one point that particular let's just say great uncle, because that makes more sense than trying to figure it out exactly, did challenge the guy who was who was potentially causing trouble to a darts game, and while they were playing darts, the Undertaker got out his tape measure and started measuring the other guy up, just to put him off the game. But I don't think that would really happen. Let's be honest, they're all I'm not sure if it was the sort of place where everyone had left their pistols at the door or something like that. So, yeah, I don't know if that would be actually a sensible thing to do. I think it is an apocryphal story. I think it is entirely an apocryphal story. Probably made up and told to grandkids many years later when they're no longer doing the job. There is always options for a shell. There's always options for it. Yeah, you never want to touch the local greengrocers. They're always popular in public. Look, Dovholt, with all the talk of uncrewed platforms, will we actually see an uncrewed or just very low crew count? I only made a screw of ships like to break when at sea. I think they're hoping for uncrewed assets. I think the reality is going to be the crewed assets need to be carrying maintenance crews to get out to these ships. I do not agree with the idea of designing anything which does not include a helicopter landing pad and the facilities for a helicopter to get aboard. Dabrock, how is Metacentric height calculated for multiple hull ships like catamarans or turbines? Very carefully. Basically, again, you have the line of the centre of buoyancy and the centre of gravity. So it doesn't matter what hull kind of form of ship you are. Even when you're combining the hulls and you are working through the hulls, you are still going to have a centre of buoyancy somewhere. It is affected by, but it's not changed. It still exists. So once you have the centre of buoyancy and then you have the centre of mass, the centre of gravity, you then work out the metacentric height from it. But it is a far more complicated mathematical procedure than it is with a monohull vessel. And I am a historian, not a maths teacher. Stanford Thompson, what would a modern Ticonderoga look like if the USN kept producing along with Berkswamp? No, the Tychos can barely grow. They basically maxed out the Spruance hull. That's half the problem for the Tychos. They basically max out the Spruance hull from the get-go. Just remember, the Burke is a newer hull design than the Spruance hull, which is the design which the Tychos are based on. The Burke is the new one. It's so Iron Brew is more like it's kind of like Coca-Cola. It's the Scottish one, but it's actually lower sugar than Coca-Cola. It's healthier food than Coke. And I'm not lying about that. That's true. It's just I am Scottish enough to do advertising of Iron Brew. David Repeat, how much money have you spent over the years buying naval books? Look, I'm not going to give an exact figure, but I will say that it's been a line item in my taxes every year for the last... Well, as long as I've had an accountant, there has been a line item, say, of money spent on books. I have an Excel spreadsheet I keep for the things when I buy them. I stick in the order, the company I buy it from, the order number, the cost, etc., the book, and the reason for it. And I send this Excel spreadsheet off to my accountant every time, and so I can put in my books because they are work expenses for me. But yeah. It's a significant amount of money. A significant amount of money. Stafford Johnson, kind of what I mean would be to stretch the hull length and beam to keep adding to it. Stafford, how do I put this? Okay. You can only do that so much to a hull. This is one of the really weird things, but constant things. Hulls, as they grow, need to change shape. as you want to build stability into them, systems into them, etc., you have to evolve the shape. The shape you can use for a hull which is sub 100 meters is not going to give you the same stability profile if you've got a hull which is a version of it which is 200 meters. You do not just go, we scale it up. There is often ships are often built into a ratio, so they have a length to beam ratio. And so as they grow by so much, they widen by so much. And at a certain point, you have to redesign the framing to support that extra width. At a certain point, you have to redesign both the longitudinal and latitudinal framing to support the extra length. And then you've got to consider the keel supports. As a ship gets longer, you cannot have a single keel. You have to start spreading the load and supporting with multiple keels. The thing is, a hull can only grow so much. Oh, I spend much more on books than I do on Iron Brew. Much more. Most months I'm naughty with Iron Brew. I have to say I buy the cans, and it's mostly the cans of Iron Brew I have. And that's going to be about 20 quid a month maximum on Iron Brew because of the way I buy them, because I buy basically multiple packs of 24 packs of cans. And the 2-litre bottles of Iron Brew, when you see me drinking those, mostly I don't buy them myself. Mostly they get bought for me by other people. Mostly when I have a 2-litre bottle of Iron Brew, it means that someone ordered some shopping and they needed to make it up to the required amount, so they stuck on a couple of bottles of Iron Brew for me. I won't say no to that. Occasionally, when it's things like Sundays, etc., I tend to have a 2-litre bottle of Iron Brew in stock. If no one else has bought one, I will buy one, because I'm going to need it for the amount of talking I do on a Sunday, because I do a Twitch stream, and then I do brew ships, so I'm talking for... Sometimes I do about 10 hours. Yeah, it's a lot. Dancy can be expensive for my bank balance. Dan Caldor, who's Boom Boom Down for the ship shape crew, is very good at tracking down books. But there's also other places I have to do. I have to go to. There's a store in Glasgow I have to use occasionally to track down books, and it's when you're one of those, you realize you might have a problem with book procurement when you realize you're one of those people who literally doesn't have a guy but has 7 guys and 2 girls who you call to track down books when they can't be found by Google or Amazon. So when Google or Amazon can't find a book, and I know it existed, I have people I call. Shh, Paul. You know, that's the thing is I think I was watching The Rookie a while back, and it was one of the characters has a guy he calls for almost every situation, and I don't really have that scenario, but I do for books. If it's a certain area of a book, I have a very nice lady who picks up my phone when I call for books on the Japanese Navy. She works out of a bookstore in Tokyo. She was someone who I met for the first time in person when I was actually in Japan. She very kindly, her and her husband, invited me to a naval history evening on my last night in Tokyo, and I got to meet her, not only to meet her, I'd already been to a bookstore while I was there on the first days in Tokyo, but got to meet a whole lot of interested people who are interested in naval history. And she very nicely, I do sometimes need to call her to explain the books I'm after. She doesn't really like emails. She's of a generation which she still doesn't like emails, but she's very happy to support me. And she also introduced me while I was out there, and she considered very important. I was introduced to her daughter, who's going to be taking over the store when she goes. The daughter is more savvy with emails, but I'm one of the mum's preferred customers, so I understand. Apparently, I have to. I keep up my relationship with the mum by messaging her first, but I do know the daughter who's going to take over after she goes, after she retires. And it's the same. It's like if I want books on British shipyards, and British design, there is a store I call in Glasgow. It's very good on that one. They're also good on railway stuff. And yeah, there's a few other sites people like. I actually have a bookstore which I have a contact with in Dallas, which I have never actually been to in person, but I was connected with them by my cousins who are out there, and they deal with most. When I want American books which I can't find, they will track them down for me, and they are really, really good. And if I can't find, I have friends who I do quid pro quos with for translating books sometimes. It's like, I've got one friend who will translate the Japanese to English quite happily. In return for that, with her, I translate the engineering of the book the stuff she's reading, because sometimes her research runs into engineering areas and she just hates it. So basically, I do all the turn the engineering into into normal linguistics, which she then works through. Not as far as I know, Stafford dual citizenship of anywhere. I just have lots of nice places where I have bookstores connected to it. I'm quite happy being a British citizen. It's quite fine. I know there are people who keep doing videos about how Britain is falling and all sorts of weird things, but I have to say my own experience of wandering around London on a semi-regular basis and wandering up and down the country occasionally, and certainly in where I live, I'm not quite sure where they're getting their information from. I'm guessing it's from someone who's overly hyping what's going on. The most disturbed the British publics I've seen was when there was just the people who kept deciding to block railways and roads a few years ago, a year or so back, and decided, and the British public basically started chucking them with their trains. Sabtons, in this scenario, if the USN built 4 of your Utah beaches for every carrier, how many of them would still be in service, and would they still be building them to define the concept? Probably would still be building them. If they kept them going and they kept building them, they'd probably still be building them, and they'd be like, in nicest way, if you had that as a scenario and those things keep building, that might have actually covered time for something to replace the Berks, because you'd have had something which, let's be honest, has a lot more space to reconfigure. Dark Souls, I'm pretty sure it's clickbait. That's what it feels like every time I see it. I get told by people who aren't wandering around where I'm wandering. I did remember once I was literally YouTube auto skipped onto a video and a podcast which I was listening to as walking along, sort of thing, and it was about how around Waterloo it was an absolute war zone. And this was a few months back, and I was actually in Waterloo. I was literally walking past Waterloo Station, and I was walking round Waterloo Station, and I'd walked from the South Bank and walked round Waterloo Station, and it was quite late at night. I was walking, and I was told there was embankments full of homeless people, and they were using, on this podcast going, and they're using Molotov cocktails. And I'm sitting there going, I haven't seen a single person! This place is empty! You'd actually be more accurate if you said, you know what, London is dead at night. I mean, it used to be a 24-hour city, and now we're lucky if we're an 18-hour city. It's literally dead. There is no one here. I am the only thing apart from the squirrels. I can't even see pigeons at this precise time. And, it was just going, no. It's a fun time. Stafford, no, I've seen myself in the mirror. I don't think anyone was planning on that with me. Let's see. Why has there never been a Royal Navy ship called HMS King George III? We have one of the 5th and the 6th soon, I believe. Literally, it's because naming ships after the monarch is something which is sort of a more recent convention. It sort of comes in with Victoria. There had been some other ideas earlier on, but they're sort of a rarity rather than regularity. And King George III was kind of a little bit, how do I put this politely? A little bit nuts. He had various issues. There's been all sorts of discussions about what he particularly causes issues. But no, it's a funny scenario for him, but yeah. We're something more kind and more modern that we start naming them after them. Seneca, are there any Bavarian contributions to naval history except being the birthplace of Juan d'Austria? Not really. The Bavarians are not really that keen on naval history, on the navy stuff. The Prussians barely get there. It's mostly once you get Imperial Germany that you start to get that area. The Hanseatic League produced some good ships, but you also have to remember the Hanseatic League is basically a mercantile trading empire, so they tend to produce quite good ships. Then we go with Staff Johnson. Would your idea of a beach variant of a Glasgow be large enough to fit it with an 8-inch autoloader? Yes. But if the USN go down that route, then maybe other navies follow them, maybe they don't. It would be interesting to see. If they had built that and they had put the 8-inch light gun on there, it would be an interesting asset to have, because it would have given them a real firepower boost. It does actually help to have a coast when you want to be a naval power. It does. Imperial. The first SL announced a month ago or so that Aegis Defender will be used as a test bed for the Type 9 series. Do you think it's a make or break situation for the CCV? I don't think so. I think we'll find it. I am very sorry to say this, but for 5 billion out of 298 billion over 4 years, and no final decision till the next Parliament, I think, frankly, most of what we hear now is going to be ruminations, research, and discovery. We'll see what actually happens. We will see what actually happens. I wouldn't be surprised if once they start testing the Type 45s with something like the 9X series, when they actually have any Type 9X series. Because have you heard of any ships being ordered? Any Type 9? They're talking about we're going to do testing on this. None have been ordered yet. And it takes roughly 2 years to build anything. And there is no hot production line, so it's going to be 2.5, 3 years from order to actual end of service entry date. Nothing's actually been ordered yet. So, the next general election takes place in 2029. The odds of us getting anything before 2029 are zilch. The odds of them being ordered, I think, before 2029 are pretty darn about the same. So, this is going to probably be whoever's in government in 2029 onwards problem. And it might be this government, it might be someone completely different. Who knows how the polls are going to go. Yeah, pretty much. There are going to be articles released, there's going to be leaks out, and there's going to be all sorts of discussion points, and there's probably going to be a little bit of money put to this company, a little bit of money put to that company. They're going to be seen having talks with this company, seen having talks with that company. They're going to said to be impressed by some design, impressed by another design. Are they smiling at this? It's going to end up generating tons of newspaper headlines and column inches and discussions on social media, and it's going to produce absolutely frigging zilch beyond some cool graphics. That's the odds. I'll be surprised if anything more happens. Matthew Killing, watch them bicker about it until 2034. Well, yeah, they could go full two general elections. But I hope they have names. They should do. Paul Emmas, how much extra work for naval designer is the requirement for an uncrewed asset when considering the crewed element, crew element required for repair and maintenance to ensure stability in anything other than a flat calm and logistics alongside key? It's not so much extra work, it's going to be a fact of life. There is going to need to be human access for maintenance. That's going to be it. Thomas Gold, a lot of consultants will make a lot of money. I know, I really should get involved in that racket, shouldn't I? I could make so much money if I got into that racket, but I just don't have the soul left to do it. I'd end up getting to the point at which I'd want to start breaking people. So no, but it would be so much money. Doing the consultancy would be so well paid. I could pay off my mortgage in like 5 minutes. Just terrible. Oh, I love the channel. I love all this stuff. I love having vaguely a soul. No, I won't do it. But oh god, it would be so much money. Oh, friggin'. I could probably write my own. I could write my own ticket, probably. Oh. 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 Night. How much does lack of need and a colonial empire factor into why the Royal Navy favoured survey ships over spy ships? Who says they did? Survey ships make a lot of sense for the Royal Navy wandering around and doing a lot of hydrography work. But the fact is, just because the Royal Navy no one claims the Royal Navy had any spy ships, doesn't mean the Royal Navy didn't have any spy ships. I'd actually be incredibly surprised if they didn't. And judging by some of the intelligence reports you get, and whilst, yes, you can have all the ships listing with their own electronic warfare capabilities, there are things like the SS Vincent, the Paul Incident, and other things where the Royal Navy, there are merchant ships which are going into areas where there is a lot of potential for information to be gathered. Knight. How much does oh, answer that one. Forgot to tick it. That's on me. Knight. As the bulk of the pre-war Royal Navy, Cold War Royal Navy Soviet fleet were conversions of other ships, how much does that say about how important Soviet work was to the ships were to the Royal Navy? It was useful, but also it's part of the function. If you think about some of these conversions are things like sloops. In fact, a lot of them are sloops. Even into the 1920s and 30s, they're sloops. And that's part of the role of sloops, is to be able to convert it into survey ships. That they're designed with that from the get-go. That's part of their functioning. Also, David, repeat, I will say Google Translate is useful, and There's the fact that whilst I'm not necessarily the best with languages, I'm actually better at reading most languages than I am at pronouncing them. Partially because I have learnt to read them before learning to pronounce them, so I tend to have my own idea for how the words might want to sound, which I don't have to learn. I don't have to be taught out of. It wouldn't be impossible, but you would have to reinvent a whole lot of the infrastructure which supported constructing it again. For the 8-inch auto to be put onto that. And yeah. Can you store supplies underwater for submarines? Theoretically, if you had the ability to access the submarine, connect up with those sort of things. So, if you had an underwater facility or something which the submarines could collect underwater and find underwater, but that's going to be difficult, making it so the submarines can find it and no one else can find it, and you can pick up the supplies. So, theoretically, you could do it, but it's going to be very, very difficult. Probably easier to have a tender ship and have multiple of them which can just tuck themselves into bays and places, and the submarine can just find them and quickly unload and offload. Imperial, is there a point in having Type 94 if you can put Seafire on Type 91 and Samson on the CCV? In a sorry interview last week. Okay, so there is a suggestion that potentially the Type 94 could also have Samson or could also have Seafire, and the idea is there's this very how do I put this politely? Okay, someone's had a bright idea. Okay, the bright idea is if you can have the radar on another vessel, an uncrewed vessel, you can have it active. And whilst it gives away its position, that ship literally is a floating radar. And so, if you if you attack it, the worst thing you lose is the radar. And that sounds like a great idea, until you start to think about how much the radar costs. And then you sit there and go, well, hang on, I can stick CFAR on the Type 90 series sloops, they're uncrewed assets, and I can have Samson and the improved boosted version of Samson, which was being designed for the Type 83 originally, for the CCV. So I already have a suite of radars. Oh, no, but if you have this specialist radar vessel, you don't have to reveal your CCV, no. But now I have to have the delay of a laser link providing information from the radar vessel to the CCV before it provides instructions and orders to the Type 91 to fire. Let me put it this way, and bluntly. I think a lot of the initial discussion of the Type 90 concept was rushed and more polished than substance. How it eventually gets translated into practice could be very different than how it was originally discussed. Someone needs to tell the person that the radar and computer systems on most ships are the most expensive part of the ships. Yeah, they really don't realize how much space those things take up. Oh, yeah. The wireless data link is going to be overloaded very quickly. It's not a nicest way. I don't think the level of data coverage you can actually use satellites for. I think you're going to have to use dedicated laser communication signal links, and probably multiple of them to actually keep up the data transfer. But that's just me doing back of the well, back of a notepad calculations. But yeah. Oh, no. Oh. Okay. That's going to be fun. Wow, there's some weird stuff coming through. I have suddenly had a whole slew of messages come from Google for some reason for me. I have no idea why. Suddenly I had about 20 emails come through from Google. I have no idea what. Alright. Calvin goes, look, why have dedicated radar vessels when you have crow's nest radar and cannot have enough halos anyway? Okay, so here's the thing. You have crow's nest to provide airborne early warning and queue up your systems. You will replace crow's nest with an uncrewed aerial asset which will also be carrying probably some version of that radar system. Maybe a new version, new radar, but probably some version of the current crow's nest system will be put onto an uncrewed aerial asset. Probably a fixed-wing drone system which is designed to launch from the carrier. And that's useful, but that will provide data as in search data. The moment you need targeting data, you have to turn on your great big radar. And that reveals the position of the asset doing the targeting. And the greater volume of threats you have coming in, the greater volume of data you're going to have to transmit and deal with. So by very definition, the most dangerous form of attack, when you've got hypersonics, cruise missiles, and drone threats coming in at the same time for the same time on target. So you're going to deal with the greatest volume of targeting data to synthesize and process and allocate systems to. You are going to need the most data transfer the quickest. That is normally why you have the dedicated radar on the ship. And this is also another reason why I am not really sure about the dedicated radar vessel, like yourself. Stafford Johnson, have you yourself, Drago or Foxo tried the modern airships or model warships? I really like using the Tycho. Not yet. I keep looking at it, but I haven't. Nice. If the Tychos are built as cruisers coming to service, would they be the same state as the Tychos are now? Potentially, if they have, potentially considering their age, but also potentially they've kept building for longer, because if they are the strike cruisers, which they're sort of closer to the strike cruisers, so they fill both roles, then it's easier to justify keeping them in production. And especially if you have a mixture of nuclear and gas-powered ones, they probably have kept the gas-powered ones going. But they probably got some of the nuclear ones still hanging around. But that's life. I know. With that being said, it is 2300 hours. We have been live for 3.5 hours. I'm going to say thank you very much to everyone. I'm going to turn questions off. I'm going to say thank you very much, everyone. I will pop into Discord in a bit. I'm just going to send something through to some of the TV companies I'm working with, because I've got some stuff come through from them, and it's something which I've got to, I'm going to just do a video to explain, I have to admit. But, yeah. A quick chat. A quick chat needs to be done. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. For some reason, I've lost the combined chat. I have no idea why the combined chat has decided to disappear on me. It does make things more interesting. I hope I haven't missed anything from you all. To answer your question, stuff which you just got into late, it's basically the follow-on to Long Beach is there's only Long Beach. There's nothing that follows on after that. Hope you all enjoyed tonight, and what we've got coming up, we have got next week the American destroyers come out, and I'm going to explain that. The reason why the American destroyers hasn't come out this week is because it's grown in length, and as said, we had a lot. I was coughing a lot, and there was a lot of dust earlier in the week, so it's fun. But the American destroyers, to give you an example of how long it is currently. So it's currently titled U.S. Destroyers 1919 to 39, 7 classes and 14 acts of Congress. That is the discussion. That is the video which is coming next week, and that's going to come out now next Tuesday, and then is going to be followed by the first video for September for the destroyers, which was Italy. So the American crew of destroyers are going to come out on the first, and Italy's going to come out on the second. It's fun. It'll be fun. And it's old history on brew ships on Sunday, so I'll look forward to seeing you all there. You might notice tomorrow is modern cruisers, modern frigates. It's a little key ships on modern frigates. It'll taste it because frigates is a couple of years away. They're still debating on next year's how next year's theme works. I'm considering calling it the year of logistics, but we'll leave that to one side. The year after that is definitely going to be the year of the frigate. Pretty much, I've decided 2020 is the year of the frigate. Year of the submarine is going to be 2030. When AUKUS is probably all coming to a head. But we'll leave that to one side. But this particular topic, sort of frigates, that's going on Saturday, and I think on Friday, and I think Saturday's video, if I'm not mistaken, is the premiere of what if all six Alaska class were ordered early enough they entered service alongside North Carolinas and South Dakotas. That's actually interesting. If you have the large Alaskas entering service that early, they become a big part of the war effort, and a very useful part of the war effort. It should be good. Anyway, take care. Thank you for being here. Hope you all enjoyed. As I said, I'm trying to catch. I've got this, basically both chats running at the same time, screen-wise, and yeah. Hope you enjoyed. Take care. Toodles. Maybe see you on Discord in a bit.